Welcome to the Center for Educational Media. This is the SPED Collaborative coming from CEM, Center for Educational Media, in the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University. We are so glad you are here today. We have people on site here, and then we have people online joining us. I'm happy to say we've got people joining us from 14 public school districts and private schools in Tennessee. And we also welcome educators from Illinois, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and California today who have joined us. I want to give a special welcome to a couple of groups here today. One is we have educators joining us today from Tennessee School for the Deaf, and we love to support the important work that's being done in that institution. We also have people joining us from the Tennessee Department of Corrections. You know, there's education happening in a lot of places in Tennessee, and we are supporting it across the board. For those who are new to the SPED Collaborative and the PK-12 Collaborative here in the Center for Educational Media, the PK-12 Collaborative is a professional development initiative that we started in 2017, looking to serve educators who have specialized roles in serving children. And the first initiative that we started was the ELL Collaborative, serving teachers that work with multilingual learners. And so that began in 2017. And it was followed a couple years later by the School Counselor Collaborative, because we had many requests from teachers. We'd like to work more closely with school counselors, and so we actually started a full School Counselor Collaborative. And then a couple years after that, we started the SPED Collaborative. So the SPED Collaborative is our newest initiative here in the PK-12 Collaborative. But we use a particular model when we do this, and we found that it's gotten good response. We have two important partners in this collaborative initiative. One, we partner with the Tennessee Department of Education so that we are informed about what they're doing and they know what we're doing, and we can be guided by their work as policymakers. And we also partner with the state professional organization for each of these groups. So for SPED, we will partner with 10 CEC, Council for Exceptional Children. Of course, for ELL, we would partner with 10 TESOL, and for school counselors, we partner with TASCA. So those of you who are viewing, those of you who are in the room here, we welcome you to join us in these other collaboratives as well as the SPED today. And we'll give you more instructions about joining future events, because you can do that through our website, which is mtsu.edu/CEM. So that is the PK-12 Collaborative. That's the SPED Collaborative. And another important component of how we design these sessions, we ask teachers and educators what would they like to hear in future sessions? What topics would you like to have help with? And so they ask for topics, suggest topics, and they do this in the feedback, which we will offer you that opportunity today during this collaborative. There will be a QR code that you'll see on the screen, and I ask all of you, please capture that QR code and give us feedback and tell us topics you'd like to have in future sessions. In that same feedback, we do another important thing. We ask you to let us know who are the practitioners in Tennessee doing the good work, and who they are the ones that we invite to do the presentations. So presenters, including ours today, have been nominated by their peers for the work they're doing in schools and in classrooms and in districts. So this QR code feedback is an important piece of what we do, so that what we offer to you is authentic and it's relevant and it's what you've asked for. So today you'll see the QR code, and Please capture it, give us feedback. We read every word that you write. Okay, before we get started, again, I want to welcome participants here from 14 school districts in Tennessee and 4 other states. So we're really happy about that. Are there any questions before we get going here today? Okay, then I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Ms. Courtney Lee. Is from Clarksville, Montgomery. And she has been nominated for her work in supporting social and emotional learning in students. And this is, we've had many requests to have some suggestions on how to do this in special education. So, Courtney, we're so happy you're here today. So if you'll come on up here and please continue, fill in, because I just introduced you very briefly, so tell us about yourself.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here.
Good morning. My name is Courtney Lee. I'm a special education teacher in Clarksville, Montgomery County. I've spent about 10 years, this is my 10th year, in Clarksville, Montgomery County working with our SPED students, a large part in CDC and middle school. I've recently switched to elementary, and that's where a bulk of my social emotional work has been done in elementary level, and that's where I'm really passionate about is the social emotional work. At that elementary school level and giving them those foundational skills. Just to start, this is a quote from Dr. Christine Tennyson. She's my aunt, and I watched one of her presentations through the ELL Collaborative, and this quote just really hit me. We don't just teach. I don't care if you've been in it 20 years or 5 years, you understand your role as an advocate for your students. When I think about SEL and I think about giving those students those skills, it's the best advocation for them because then they can advocate for themselves. If our kids don't have those social emotional skills and can't tell us how they're feeling or what they need, then they can't advocate for themselves. It's the very basis of that everything for me. Just a SEL, just as an overview, are lessons that are meant to teach skills such as social skills, emotional skills, attitudes, behaviors, and values. And those are all such broad topics. And a lot of them can be done through just basic interactions. And that's my favorite part of it, I think, is that just having basic interactions with your students and talking to them and enjoying them and giving them real honest feedback is giving them that social emotional learning. So this is just kind of like our basic layout for what my PowerPoint looks like and how I'll go through. A large portion of it will be spent in elementary school just because that's where I've done the bulk of my social emotional work and where I've seen the great growth in my students. There's some middle school strategies that I used in my middle school days where I did for a little bit. I was in an extended behavior support program, so did some SEL stuff with them, and then just some useful accommodations that we can give our kids to support them socially and emotionally that are done pretty widespread, but some of them are super easy. So there are 2 basic types of support that I used, that I currently have been using in elementary school, and that's that small group pullout. And typically for SEL, what I do for small group pullout is a morning session and an afternoon session. Y'all, when I say sessions, I'm talking like 10 to 15 minutes. That's typically all I keep them because when I'm working with them, I have like first graders and second graders, the littles. You're not keeping their attention for longer than about 10 or 15 minutes on one topic. So anything longer than that becomes arduous for you and for them. So then I would do a morning session, and then that same group as kids, I would do an afternoon session with, again, 10 to 15 minutes, just checking in and checking out. And then there's that course support in the general education classroom. focusing on specific students that need the social emotional support. So we know we have core support for those students who need things like reading and math support, but we also have those students who need to learn social and emotional skills inside the general education classroom, because small group work's amazing for some things, but teaching things like raising your hand, not talking over your teacher, being nice to your peers, those things are best supported in the general education classroom because you can actually talk to them about the interactions. So that core support in a general education setting, it's really important, and I think oftentimes something that we don't focus on enough for our students who are lacking these skills. Okay, so my morning small group, at the very beginning of the day in Montgomery County, we've had a large push on social emotional across the board for general ed students as well. So at the school I'm currently at, there's a 15-minute SEL portion at the very beginning of the day. So it just worked out great for me because I literally just took them out of that social emotional big group time and brought them into a social emotional small time. I had some groups that ran as long as 30 minutes, but the sweet spot for me was 15 minutes. Like I had them in my room for 15 minutes and I took them back, and that was perfect. You don't want to cut yourself too short, but like I said, you don't want to get it too long because the littles then become real extra. We included in our morning small group, we included calendar, a weekly book, social story video clip activity, and then a token reward system. Those are the three main things that I hit on every day, and my kids knew that pattern and knew exactly what was expected when they walked in my classroom. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about those three things. So this is my calendar time, y'all. It was my absolute favorite. I cannot stress enough how much this taught my kids and how much it showed me about my kids and them about me. This would be last December, and this is what the calendar looked like when I gave it to them. I would write things like winter break, our holiday music program, that was whoever's birthday, I whited out his name, and then the half day, and just basic information that our kids may need. So this is what it looked like at the beginning of the month. It's just a blank calendar. I usually tried to pick something that had fun on it. They like to color it, you know. Google is your best friend. They have all kinds. So at the end of the month, this is something like it would look like. This is mine, so it looks a little neater. I had some student ones, but I couldn't figure out a way to get their names off of them, and so just all those guidelines. This is mine. So you see that there are some days where I was like a basic color, and there are other days where I was like, I'm going to get a little bit extra, because some days our students are a little bit extra and they do the same thing. So on this slide, and if you think about these colors, and it can be interactive, but think about something you could associate, a feeling that you could associate with these colors. So I'll start. So I had one kid who loved telling me rainbow. That was her color every day when we talked about it. She'd be like, I'm rainbow today. I'm like, okay, awesome, you're rainbow today. What's the feeling though? And so she would have to pick a feeling out of rainbow. Well, I'm pink because my mom loves me. And I'm like, okay, that's perfect. That was her color in that rainbow. A lot of times you see a lot of schools already have a color chart. They already do some type of, your guidance counselors a lot of times do some type of color coding for your emotions. Typically there's 4 basic ones. So the kids can go green because I'm happy, because they know that one. And then as you progress, so we started with our 4 basic colors because our school does one of the color codes. And we started with our 4 basic colors. Green, they were happy. Blue, they were tired. Yellow, they were tired. Blue, they were upset. Red, they were like something big was happening in their lives. Those are the 4 we started with. And then as the semester went on, y'all, they would be like, purple because it's my favorite color and I'm having an awesome day. And y'all, the things it tells you about your students. Because not only when my students do their calendar and color their day every day, I would do my calendar at the same time as them. So like we would start and they would color it. I'm like, okay, what's your color today? They would color it, a quiet time, some reflection, because they knew what was coming next was me going, okay, Toby, what color are you today? And he would have to tell me, I'm yellow, and then I'd be like, okay, but why are you yellow? And then, not only are they picking a color, but they're having to tell you their feelings. Because if we're not giving them those words for them to tell us their basic feelings at a time that's safe, they're never going to be able to find those words to tell us their feelings at a time when they're escalated. The more feelings we can give them, the more words we can give them to understand their own feelings, the better they can tell us those at times when they're feeling some type of feeling that we don't know or is causing them to be escalated in the classroom. So I have for you, it was on the takeout table, a December calendar. I made it real quick in PowerPoint. And I encourage all of you to take this calendar with you, fill it out. If you recognize how you're feeling in the morning, what could you change to make your day better? And that's what we did, kind of like my students when they came to me and they were like, oh, I'm red today. Oh, okay. I was like, where's my end of month calendar? I skipped it. So on a yellow day, on that day, I was tired, but then I was also super frustrated. So I did like yellow because I was tired. And then I put red because I had had a horrible morning at my house. And one of my own kids had been mean or something, so I put red. And so then when I was able to share that with my small group also, they were able to look at me and go, oh, Miss Lee's having a bad day already. Miss Lee is having a bad day, so what can I do to make her day better? How can I be here 100% to make sure that her day gets to green? How can I do what I need to do to support her? I mean, my kids came in for me on these days where I was not green. They'd come in and be like, what can I do? By December, they'd be like, Miss Lee, why are you yellow today? Like, I would hold my calendar up, they'd be like, but why? Like, they got to ask me those questions too. And having those honest conversations with them. Sometimes you have to, like, you're yellow and you can't really explain all the reasons why you're yellow, but you have to give them that honesty. I am yellow today, and I'm yellow today because I'm tired, because I'm frustrated, because you yelled at me this morning. I had a kid who would yell at me some mornings, and so some mornings I was yellow because he yelled at me, and he'd be like, and he was in my group, and he'd be like, I'm so sorry I yelled at you this morning and I made you yellow. And so then we would also have that honest conversation about ways that we could go from yellow to green. If one of them would be like, I miss my mom. I'm blue today because I didn't want to come to school because I miss my mommy. Okay, well, what can I do to make your day better? You know that in 5 hours, you get to go home and see mommy again. Mommy's going to pick you up at car rider line. And even just saying those simple words would give the students what they needed to get through the day. But when they come in the morning and they're upset, their teacher doesn't know what to do with them, they have 26 other students, and nobody has asked the simple question, but why are you upset? When we did this, when we started, I would go first. And we would talk about words like frustrated, sad, happy, excited. I had one student who you would think that he was mad all the time because he colored his calendar red almost every single day. But red for him was just a big feeling. Most of the time it was because he was excited to be at school. So we had to talk about those things too. That even though you're red right now, it doesn't mean that you're upset. You can have big feelings and you can tell me your big feelings, but they don't have to be that you're so sad or you're so angry. They can be that you're really, really happy and that's why you're bouncing in your chair today. So preloading and talking about all these feelings and a color you associated with them. And then, so we start with those 4 basic colors, but at some point you're going to end up with students picking purple because that's their favorite and they feel awesome today. And giving them that opportunity to explain themselves was life-changing for me. Like being able to let her color rainbow. That made her so happy in the morning. And then I'm like, okay, pick one color in your rainbow and tell me why you feel that color. It changed her. It changed her in the mornings. The mornings that she could come and explain herself helped her, and it helped me to support her in the classroom. Because if we have those students that we know they're struggling social emotionally, we know that there's stuff going on at home, that we know that they come in and they had a bad time on the bus or whatever, letting them talk to us about it, oftentimes that's all they need. They need their feelings validated, and they need to know that we're listening. So this calendar, it was life-changing. So I encourage you guys to have a reflective moment with yourself each morning. I mean, literally like it would take you like 3 minutes to actually stop. I colored it every single day with them. Color it, tell yourself how you feel, because when you go into work and you're yellow, you're probably not being the best you either, because I know I wasn't. But it can help you. And then when you do it with the students, they'll start supporting each other in those color days too. I had interactions in my classroom where, and it was later on, we had been doing this for months, where it's like March, and one of my friends looked at another one and said, "I'm really sorry that you're unhappy this morning. Can I give you a hug?" And it made him happy. It fixed that one part of his day so that he could go back to his classroom and actually engage in his work instead of being unhappy at his desk. So the weekly book, social studies video, social story or video clip, typically we would watch the clip or read the book. There are tons and tons of kids shows right now that have great social emotional lessons in them that you can literally watch like a 5-minute clip and then talk about it. So many things. They love the shows already. Most of them are invested in at least one of the shows. And you can find those shows and you can watch just a portion of it and then talk about that show. So a lot of times, because it was so short, the first day we would just watch it or read the book. Because we didn't have enough, once we did calendar, like especially on those days where you had a long calendar, we would just watch it and I'd be like, okay, we're gonna think about it, we're gonna come back tomorrow. And then on day 2, we would talk about the main message in that clip or book. Now, a lot of times I would base what I'm pulling here off the behaviors that they had the previous week, or what I saw as a need the previous week. There are social stories out there for everything. If you don't want to use clips from a cartoon, you can find a social story for anything. So when this was not just some clip that I would pull randomly, this was thought about, this was planned out. You have to think about it because you have to think what's going to best help your students at this time. I would read books with them that always connected back to something that we wanted to work on. So the third day, usually I had a color page with a sentence starter, and that color page usually, I have one. So this had a color page, and it was like one of those graphics that said, "I can be my best." And it had like a bunch of different stuff around it. And this week we were focusing on how can I be my best. And then I gave them this sentence starter. I can be my best today by. How can you be your best today? What can you do to be your best? And all of them were a little bit different. And this week that we did the I can be my best today, we were focusing on how we could be our best inside the classroom. You can be your best in a lot of different ways. One of them wanted to write, I can help my mom. I said, well, what about school? How can you be your best at school today? So that's where we come up with the answers like raising your hand in class. And then you can expound on that because that is such a hard skill for some of our kids. And then we would do, day 4, I usually spent direct questions about the clip or the book. Like I would show one of the pictures from the book or the clip and I'd be like, okay, what feeling is this character feeling right now? How do you know he's feeling that feeling? I think a lot of times our students have trouble with identifying their feelings because they don't know the words. They've never been taught the word frustrated. They've not specifically been taught the word upset. They've not specifically been taught those words and specifically been taught how their body feels in coordination with those words. So a lot of times when we can watch a clip and the guy's face is a certain way, or his hands are clenched, or he's going like this, then that tells them, oh, well, when I do that, maybe that's the thing that I'm feeling. And so a lot of times on day 4, that's what we would talk about. I would pull specific pictures and we would talk about those words and those feelings and how you look when you do them, or how it makes other people feel when you do things like that. Because for especially our little kids, they don't understand how their behaviors affect other people. So a lot of times in the books, or the social stories or the video clips, it's gonna have another character's reaction to the way that they're feeling also. So when I'm pulling stuff for day 4, I'm pulling that stuff. I'm pulling pictures of faces. I'm pulling quotes from the book about what they said that maybe made someone not feel so good. All of those things. And then on day 5, it was literally a what feel right kind of thing. On Fridays, a lot of times we would do free game Friday, where we played board games and we had to wait our turn. That's a hard one too. Where we couldn't talk over each other. And that was another important thing with calendar time. When we shared, if someone started to say something over their friends, it was an immediate redirection. Your friend is talking right now. You can't talk over them. You have to wait your turn. So this calendar time taught so many soft skills also. So my token reward. So my kids loved this. It was something I implemented middle of the year because I had some kids who I could not get their behavior under control, and they are extremely extrinsically motivated though. I said, okay, I can do this, but I'm not giving you candy every single day of my life, because you're not gonna go in the classroom and get candy every single day of your life. You're gonna have to be able to do something. So I started these token boards, and they hung on my wall so they could see them every single day. I didn't do stickers because stickers have an extra cost. I literally printed this, hung it on my wall, and at the end of whatever session we were in, and I use this for everything, so I used it for my social emotional, my reading intervention, my math intervention. Anytime that child was in my classroom, at the end of that particular session, they got to go to their token board. And we had asked ourselves 3 questions. It was me asking them, were you responsible today? Were you engaged today? Did you do what I asked you to do? And then there was something like, was I nice? Like, was I nice to my friends? And if they could say yes to all of those, then they got to put a smiley on their board. Let me tell you, we had some strict rules about smileys, because when you got a wall and you got first graders and second graders, they don't pay attention all the time. So they would accidentally write it on someone else's chart, or they would forget to write it on theirs, or they would do some crazy stuff. And at the end of the day, I said, guess you gave your friend a smiley. We had some strict rules. We went into it that said that you put your smiley on your chart every day. I'm not doing it for you, that's you. You earned it, you keep it, it's your money, you get to put it on your board. If you don't remember to put it on your board, then you don't have it anymore. If you accidentally put it on my board, then you just gave me a smiley today, thank you. And those were all rules I taught beforehand. That it was so much fun, because you had to have at least 5 smileys to buy something in my classroom, so for some of them, that's an entire week, because some of them I only saw once a day. Some of them, my favorite friends, I saw 4 times a day, so they could buy things more often. But I had drawers in my classroom that acted like my treasure box. They were built into my classroom. I didn't know what I was going to do with them when I got in there. I was like, oh, those are weird, okay. They ended up being my treasure box system. The first drawer was 5 smileys. You could pull open my drawer, and anything in that drawer was worth 5 smileys. My second drawer was 10 smileys, and my bottom drawer was 15 smileys. So that meant that for some of them, if they wanted something out of that bottom drawer, like for some of my older kids, the Talkies, the Silly Putty, the bigger Poppets, all of those things, some of them had to wait 3 weeks. And so this came into conversations about being responsible with your smileys and saving your smileys and all of those things that also are soft skills our students just don't see a lot of times anymore. I had one student who's like, I really want the Pop-It. And I'm like, okay, but you only have 6 smileys. But I could spend 5 of them. You could spend 5 of them, but the Pop-It's 15. So are you spending your 5 today, or are you saving for those 15? Because you can't get something out of the 5 drawer and save for the Pop-It. You can't do both. So then, as they spent them, it wasn't any extra work on me. I just took any extra work on anybody, except I took my Sharpie over there, and I would mark out their 5 smileys that they spent that day. Typically, I didn't let them shop every day. If somebody got enough smileys and they came up to me at the end of the class after they put their smiley on the chart and they were like, hey, can I buy something? Then I would let them. But it wasn't something that I was like, let's go to the treasure box every day. They would ask, or we would do it on Friday. I'd be like, does anybody have smileys they want to spend today on Friday? But if they asked me and they knew how to use their words and asked in the correct manner, then I would let them go any day, because functional communication is a huge thing. And if you can come up to me at an appropriate time or raise your hand at an appropriate time and ask me a question, then more than likely I'm going to tell you, yes, you can do it if it is appropriate. So this was a game changer for me too, because when the kids didn't get their smileys at first, it was hard. It was hard for them to understand why they didn't get their smileys. But asking those same questions every day, I came up with my 3 questions, and sometimes, so with my first graders, responsible was hard for them to understand. So we talked about what responsible meant, and sometimes when they looked at me weird, I'd be like, did you do what you were supposed to do? That's what responsible means. And when they would say yes, I'd be like, are you sure? And I'd make them think about it. If they weren't getting that smiley, we were talking about why they weren't getting that smiley, so that the next day or the next session that I had them, they could get that smiley. It's a learning tool more than anything. I mean, yes, I had to have stuff in my classroom, but I had one student who didn't earn his smiley 2 times in a row, and then the rest of the week he earned his smileys because he realized that he wasn't going to get to buy what he wanted to buy. And so his behavior in my classroom changed drastically when I implemented this. So many soft skills to be learned through something like a simple token reward that doesn't require anything except literally I printed this off and then taped it to my wall with their name on it. They had to put their smiley on it. It was like there was a cup of markers specifically for them, like we asked a question and they did it all. So it didn't require me buying stickers. It didn't require me to do anything extra except print this off, really. So it was amazing. In our afternoon small groups, we literally started with the question, how was your day? How was your day today? So in the beginning, in August, we heard things like good, bad, and that was a lot of good and bads. As we got further into our semester, if someone said good or bad, I would say, I'm sorry, you can't use that word. I need a different word. What could we use that means good? Was it really good, and could you say awesome or amazing? Was it just okay? Were you upset about something? Is that why it was bad? We had rules as we got further in, and as we learned more vocabulary, you have to put it into place, because even if you're just telling them upset means this, until they see it in context and until they can put that back onto their lives, they're probably not going to want to use the word or understand the word as fully as they could. So after we talked about it, I had a sheet of paper with the date in the middle, and they would write one word to describe their day. And so at the end of in April and May, we would get words like fantastic on first try, and those were good days. And to see their growth, it was amazing, because we literally started with them knowing those basic good and bad. That was a lot of what my first graders would say. And at the end, we even instituted a rule that if your friend said that word, you could not use the same word as them. So it made them think about their feelings and kind of reflect back on the day. And now a lot of my kids that I saw, I had interactions with outside my classroom in the gen ed setting as well. So if they said they had a fantastic day, sometimes I would look at them and be like, are you sure your day was fantastic? Because they need help recognizing that maybe they did mess up. Maybe they had a setback, but then they overcame it. And they need help recognizing that sometimes we're going to go home and tell mom that you were frustrated today. And that's completely okay because that's a valid feeling to have. So knowing your students, and if you're not in the classroom, just having that conversation with that teacher occasionally, like, so that way your student's not saying like awesome, amazing every day, and you're completely oblivious to the fact that they may not have torn the room up, but they did not have a great day today. And then we would play a board game, a card game, or a social game. This is where that take and turn stuff came in, that you don't always win stuff. The real life skills that our students absolutely don't have anymore. I can't tell you how many times I had to console a crying child because they didn't win the board game. They did not win Ants in My Pants. I'm so sorry, buddy, and we don't win all the time. And that's okay. Maybe you can win next time. And we had dice that we would roll that had questions on it. Just that most of them were like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what was one of your feelings today? Things like that. Basic things that make them take turns and make them have those skills. So here's an example of I was literally like, I took a computer sheet of paper, I cut it in half, I wrote the date on it. And then, so we had one bad, a lonely, a rough, and a fun. That was a day I wouldn't let them use the same words because we were in December, and I would find that one of my students would copy. He never wanted to say anything original, and so we instituted a rule that you could not use the same word as your friend. So we would sometimes need help with, our friends would sometimes need help with that, and we would go around the circle and be like, okay, well, his day was bad today, but somebody already said bad. What could we say? What's another word we could use for bad? He's having a hard time thinking of another word. Can someone else tell me a word that we could use? So once again, reinforcing all of those different feelings and all of those different ways that a day can make us feel, because sometimes rough is not a word that they would think of, but is a word that I would describe my day with. It was just rough. It was just rough. So why games? So we encourage the turn taking, that losing in a controlled environment. Some days we would do the teamwork aspect of the game. Like I would change up the rules for the basic game and be like, okay, you both have to get all your ants in the pants. You two are on a team and you two are on a team, and both of you have all of your ants in the pants. That's who win. That you win as a team. The critical thinking skills, and then the following rules, because those basic rules, they're hard. The taking turns, the not talking over each other, the not getting upset. But losing in a controlled environment is super important, because we send our kids to PE. We send our kids back to that gen ed classroom where occasionally they play games where they compete against each other, and they don't know how to take it when they lose. They just don't. Especially our little ones, they have a hard time with that. And so when it's in a controlled environment and there's only 5 or 6 kids in your small group setting, you can help them through that on a much easier basis, and then help them take that back to the classroom. So core support. This is another, and I don't know if it's statewide, but in our county we've gone from saying inclusion to saying that word core support. So it means the same thing as inclusion. Teaching students to use the calm down corner in my school and almost across our district now. We have a calm down corner in our elementary school. We call it like the nest because our mascot is a blue jay. So we have a nest you can sit at that has fidgets and has calm down strips and has all of these things. Teaching our students to use it appropriately is a core aspect of the calm down corner though. So when you're in there and you see a student becoming upset, hey, do you need to use the calm down corner right now? There's some fidgets in the calm down corner. There's one you really like. Why don't we go try that for a few minutes? The prompting them to ask for it and to ask them if they need it is important, because then they realize that they can ask for it. Because a lot of times with some of our friends who get upset, they feel intimidated also. They don't want to raise their hand and ask in front of 25 other students if they can go to the calm down corner. But when you're in there for core support and you can see them getting frustrated and you can bend down and have that one-on-one conversation with them, hey, do you need to go to the nest? Do you need to use your calm down corner right now? They understand that you're understanding and you want them to use it, and they can go, yeah, I need it right now. Even if they didn't realize they needed it, you did, and then later on, they're going to pick it up. They're going to pick up those feelings that when you came over to them that they're having that feelings, and if you keep doing it and you keep prompting them, then later on when they feel those feelings, they're going to go, hey, Miss Lee always takes me to the calm down corner when I feel this way. Maybe I can just ask if I need to go to the calm down, that I can go to the calm down corner. Assisting with occupational therapy devices that might be present. So this one was big for me this year. I have some friends who aren't great at writing, who have some grasps that need help and stuff, and they get so frustrated with writing. And that frustration comes out in ways that we don't need in the classroom. And so I've taken to, when we go to write, hey, do you need help with your pencil grip right now? Do you need me to show you how to use it again? Because those pencil grips sometimes can be confusing, and there's like 16 different kinds, and one might work for one student, and a different one might work for another student. And sometimes they're trying a new one, or it's Monday and they just don't remember. And they need help using that pencil grip so that they can write. And there are some other things like AAC devices that help our students express their needs that they don't necessarily always want to use or have not been taught to use all the time. That is super important. Really assisting with them using those devices that they've been given to support them, because sometimes they get frustrated because they just don't know how to use it. We think as adults, we're like, oh, it's easy, they're going to get it, but they just don't know, or they're confused. Going back and making sure that they know how to use those, especially writing. Writing is so hard for some of our friends. And even just getting your hand right and making sure that it's in your pencil grip right, and it'll change for them. It'll change the world for them, some of them. I've seen amazing growth in one of my students because literally a pencil grip, like a pencil grip. Recognizing when students are getting frustrated or angry. This is hard for them to recognize when they're little because they've never been taught that this is how my body looks. I get hot, or my cheeks get red. They're probably getting hot, their cheeks are red, or I go like this. And that means I'm frustrated. So when we start recognizing it, it's the same as the calm down corner. Buddy, you have your hands in a fist. Are you upset right now? Why are you upset? Can you tell me what it's about? But always telling them, always telling them why you're telling them they're upset. That's what I figured out. Like, he has his hand in a fist. I don't just come over and I'm like, hey, are you upset? I'm like, hey, buddy, I noticed your hand was balled up in a fist. Why? Are you upset? Are you frustrated? Are you angry? Like, what are you feeling right now? Why is your hand in a fist? So that way, later on down the road, they can realize that when they're fisting their hand, that might be a sign of them being angry at something or someone. Then assisting with use of calm down techniques at their desks. I have some pictures that can be used at their desk in just a second. And then removing from the students from the classroom as a last resort. We have sometimes that we're just going to have to remove that student to get them to calm down, and sometimes that's best for the student and best for the class. I always used it as an absolute last resort because we want them in there getting that general education core instruction, and we want to make sure that they're getting their needs met. But at some point, sometimes you just got to take them out to calm down. So these are some things that I use at their desk. So you can't see it really well, but over here on The left-hand side of this desk is just one of those comm strips. I have some students who have responded amazing to them. They're stickers. If they peel them off, I bought them in a pack of 50. I mean, you can have a new one. This is a sensory bottle. It's a homemade sensory bottle. A teacher at my school made it about 3 years ago. This is a particular student. He keeps it on his desk, and when he has now noticed that when he starts to get frustrated, if he flips his bottle and watches the glitter fall to the bottom and takes a deep breath, he can then go back to his work and get it done. It took us about 6 months to get to the point where he figured out he could flip it himself and that helped him, but he keeps this on his desk. It is his bottle, and when other people take it, we have to find it because it's actually his. I have a few students who rely on the stretchy bands that go around the front of their desks for their feet wiggles. Some of them, when they get angry, they just need to move. And so we have the stretchy bands that go around the chair, the bottom of the chair, and sometimes that's all they need. So finding these small things, some of our students obviously cannot keep a sensory bottle at their desk. That would not be good for them. It might fly across the classroom. It might be used inappropriately. It may be a super distraction. So some of these things aren't going to work for all of our students, and that's okay because they're individuals. However, we can't say that it won't work for any of them because I lay money on the fact that I did not think that my student would respond to this bottle. I really thought it would become a distraction and that it would end up being played with all day, every day, and it did not. It just didn't. He loves it, he uses it, he still uses it. So just trying things with every student. Even if you think they won't work, these simple things sometimes will. And even if he looks or acts the same as another student and that other student didn't respond to it, doesn't mean he won't respond to it. Middle school is much more brief. I spent longer in middle school, but I found that it's harder to pull them out of class. It's harder. Middle school is harder social-emotionally to teach them those skills. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about doing it at such an early age. K-1-2 is my sweet spot where I just love teaching those social-emotional skills. If we can teach it at K-1-2 and they can have those skills going into middle school, then it's not going to be as big of an issue in middle school. So I did 2 different types of support in middle school. A one-to-one, we did a check-in, check-out system. And then we did some course support. And that course support in middle school is very, very similar to course support in elementary school with a few modifications. So check-in at the beginning of the day during arrival. Most middle schools have a period of time where the doors open and then the bell rings. It's like 15 or 20 minutes, I think, in Montgomery County. Typically, I try to find these students at that time. It literally was like 5 minutes. They got a piece of paper that looked something like this with the date, the student name, how many points we wanted to earn, and then a goal that I set with them. So the date, the student name, and the goal points were something that I filled out. Typically, I did that on my computer, and I would print them so I didn't have to write it every single day of my life. And the mentor, I put my own name down there so that way if they had a problem in class, their teacher knew who to contact about said problem. So this was a really good way to track what they were doing and have them responsible for it. Because I would hand it to my kids and I would say, okay, you're responsible now. We talk about it in the morning. We did write the today I will, their goal. That was something we wrote together. That was the only thing I wrote different every day for them. Some days for them, if they were tired, it was just stay awake in every class. Some days we all have those days, and when you're working with students who have social emotional needs and who have some emotional disabilities or something, some days staying awake is a huge deal for them. So that was an okay goal for me. So the points typically we tried to stay at, most of my friends were at 80%, and so I would just add up how many there were and then did 80%, and that was our goal points for that day. But when we put 80% up there, that was hard for the student to realize what they needed to do. It said percent for a long time. I changed it to points because then they knew they could go down, they could count They could go okay, I got 6 points in first period, I got 5 points in second period. How many more points do I need to get my reward for today? To get my Mustang Bucks was what I did in the middle school I was at. There was a store they could go to, and they earned bucks for it. And so most of my kids wanted bucks at the end of the day, and I was cool with that because it meant no money out of my pocket. So with points, they can keep track of it themselves. They know when they got all zeros in first period because they did absolutely nothing, or they were rude to their classmates and rude to their teacher. They knew that they either had to turn their day around or they weren't going to get their reward. They weren't going to get what they wanted from me. Now, and like I said, this mentor teacher is something I added later on because it gave subs a name to connect with if that student needed support. It gave teachers the name because you want to say those teachers know those students, and they do, but when you have 160 students coming in and out of your classroom, it's hard to remember exactly what mentor goes with what student, especially when you have those of us who are keeping up with more than one student. My last year in middle school, I think I ended up having like 10 check-in, check-outs. Like I had 10 different students who would come back to me, and so the teachers had a hard time keeping up with who exactly was coming to me. So when I added this mentor line, it was less calls, less calls, hey, is this your student? And more time that they didn't have to spend away from the class trying to locate the mentor of the student that was having an issue. So at the end of the day, we would just review, again, 5 minutes. Typically, there's that time at the end of sixth period where they're getting ready to go to the buses. I would try to sneak in and see them 5 minutes or less. Like it's just a check-in, especially if they've had a good day. Perfect. We reviewed our goal. Did you stay awake all day today? Oh, it looks like you slept in second and third period. That's okay. You only slept 2 out of the 6 periods today, but we'll be better tomorrow. I always ask, what did you need to do for homework? You got homework tonight? Make sure you do your homework. Did you have a good experience today? Did you have a bad experience today? Giving them those words again, because a lot of these kids still haven't learned those words to express their feelings. They didn't get it in elementary school. They don't get it at home. They still need it. So giving them those words to be like, oh, nope, I struggled today. And then that core support was a lot. It's harder in middle school because this is where our kids feel like when we come up to them that they're getting singled out, that other people are recognizing that we're coming up to them. A lot of whole class prompting is what I did, even in small groups. Hey, if you guys are angry about something, remember you can always come talk to me. Hey, if you're struggling in class, remember we can do this. Some days it got bad and I'd be like, okay, everybody put it down. Everybody take 5 deep breaths. Because in middle school it is so hard, those students don't want to feel singled out. But a lot of it was recognizing when they're getting angry, and a lot of these students who are doing core support are probably also on your check-in, check-out. So at the end of the day, I would go back and be like, hey, in second period today, I noticed that you were clenching your fists and that maybe you were a little bit upset about something. So again, recognizing what they look like when they're frustrated, so that way you can tell them what they look like and they can start recognizing, oh yeah, I'm frustrated. So here are just some useful accommodations that I found useful for our kids who are struggling socially, emotionally, having behavioral outbursts in the classroom. Sensory tools, I've shown some of those that are the most common that I use. Breaks are super important, and then chunking assignments. It's hard to know whether their behaviors have led to the fact that they can't do the assignments, or that they can't do the assignments and that's what's leading to their behaviors. That's a hard thing to pin down. But chunking assignments a lot of times for my kids who were overwhelmed and then would become an issue was a godsend. So our sensory tools, we looked at strips, we looked at bottles. Oh, there's fidget seats. I think I've collected like 5 or 6 of them, and so now I have people come and ask me, hey, you got an extra fidget seat? I'm like, yeah, I got an extra one, and I lend them out. They can really help. I don't know if you've ever tried them, but if you have a student who is really fidgety or who needs to move when they're upset or needs to move when they're happy, those seats will wobble. They're also known as like wobble seats. The bands for the bottom of the desk that we've talked about earlier, and then fidget toys. Fidget toys are hard because there's so many different ones. Some kids respond to some of them. Some kids respond to other ones. Some kids can't use fidget toys at all. I've noticed that like a lot of my kids like the balls with the beads in them, but they break. So this is once again, a student-by-student basis. You're going to have to, just because one sensory toy doesn't work for them does not mean that another sensory toy won't work also. It's not a blanket statement. You have to try everything. It can become daunting, but you can find one that works for them that doesn't become a toy. And really it's the same with all of them, the bottles, the seats, the bands, the fidget toys. You have to teach them it's a tool, not a toy. I learned, one of my first grade teachers taught me that phrase last year, and now I say it all the time when my kids are using things incorrectly. I'm like, that's a tool, not a toy. So you have to teach them that, though, along with all of these things. So you can't just give them a fidget toy and expect them to know that it's a tool and not a toy, because they probably have one at home that they use as a toy, and they use all the time. But you have to teach them that these things aren't something that we can distract our neighbors with, aren't something that we can use all, like when we're supposed to be doing our independent work. You have to set those guidelines with them and those boundaries, and you also have to set those consequences and be firm in your consequences. If you say, if you hit your friend with that, I'm going to take it, if they hit their friend with it, you have to take it, or they don't learn anything. So like I said, hard to find sometimes the one thing that fits them, because it's literally a trial and error situation with every single student. You're not going to find a one-size-fits-all. All of our students are different. All of us are different. Breaks work wonders with some of our students, and again, not with some of our students. Also work differently for elementary and middle school. In middle school, I had a student who had a designated spot for his break. He had a timer in that spot. He went to that spot, he set his timer, and he was responsible enough that when that timer went off, he went back to class. In elementary school, not an option. You have to have it, you have to be walked to and from your breaks. But there are several options. You can do it within the classroom. So a lot of us have those calm down corners. A lot of us have partner teachers. My school has a partner teacher set up. It's automatic in the beginning of the year. This is your partner teacher, and when y'all need a break, you can just ask them, hey, can you go to this teacher's classroom? Hey, do you need to go to this teacher's classroom? Some of them just need a simple walk. I have one that when he gets frustrated inside the classroom with something's going on, we walk to the water fountain, he gets a drink of water, we walk back to the classroom, and he's fine. And I have one that did that last year, and at first I had to accompany him to the water fountain, and I had to walk with him, and I had to make sure that he came back to class. But as the months went on, and he knew the expectations, and he knew that there would be consequences if he didn't follow the expectations, he could walk to the water fountain alone and then walk back to the classroom immediately. It started gradually, like I would stand in the classroom door and watch him walk to the water fountain and walk back. And then one day I said, I think you can do it on your own today. Can you walk to the water fountain and walk back? And he was like, yeah, I can do that, Miss Lee. I'm like, okay, I'm trusting you to do it. Don't break my trust, because if you do, then I have to walk with you again. So different for every student, your level of trust in the student, the month that it is, the day that it is, because some days he was so escalated, he needed a walk, but I knew he couldn't walk alone. So I would have to go with him. But some days I knew that I could send him on his own. So the route in some of these in a lot of these things is just knowing your students, taking the time to get to know them, and that is one of the huge benefits of that calendar time, of that time where you just get to talk with your students, but also teach them some type of skill. Because if we don't know the student, we don't know what's going to work for them and what's not going to work for them. That's why it's hard when we get new students. That's why it can be so complicated, is that we have no clue, and each student is their own person, and they all respond differently. Chunking assignments, there are different ways to do this. Sometimes some students will just let you fold the assignment. Like there's 3 different sections on the assignment. I fold it so you can only see one of them. You do that one section. I come over, I'm like, oh, you did great. Let's go on to the next section. And then I fold it a different way and they do the next section. Some students, that was still too much. And they were like, absolutely not. I still have my whole paper. So some students, I would literally have to take my scissors and cut their assignments apart. But if I cut it in groups of like 4 or 5, they could do the whole assignment in the time period. They just got super overwhelmed because it was 20 problems and they were like, I can't do this. Yes, you can. So sometimes I would have to cut the assignment apart, and some teachers don't like that. But if it helps the student, then you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes we would do odds and evens. This one gets a little trickier because then they're only doing half of the assignment. And for grade, if you're in a grade that grades, or you need to see if they've done mastery of a skill, then we don't want odds or evens because it doesn't give them enough to show us whether or not they mastered that skill. I preferred the folding of the paper. Most of my students got on board with that. If they couldn't do folds, then I did cut the assignment. And I had a few who, if we got to the end of the time period and they weren't done, and it was 1 row of problems, I'd be like, you're fine. It's fine. I'll talk to your teacher. You didn't get 1 row of problems. You did your best. As long as they were doing their best. I tried to stay away from odds and evens. Like I said, that cuts your assignments in half, and then it can get dicey. So, does anybody have any questions or anything for me?
Get them to be able to associate their feelings with the colors and to understand that concept.
Okay, so she asked when I was doing calendar time about how long it took me to get my students to associate the colors with their feelings. And I would say that the basic ones, like the 4 colors, because our school taught that program as a whole, for a lot of years, they knew those, so that didn't take me very long. But letting them expand into other colors, it took me like 2 or 3 months for them to strongly associate. And even with those basic colors, I wanted them to tell me why they were happy. Like, okay, you told me you were happy, but can you tell me why you're happy? So we worked on that a lot, and you just have to keep talking. But I would definitely say 2 or 3 months to associate their feeling with the color. At the end at the end, they were like, rainbow. I was like, perfect, pick one. But yeah, it does take a while.
So your school had a school-wide, do you all do PBI? What do you all do for your school-wide?
So we do something, we don't do PBIS. She asked if school-wide, if we did PBIS. So we don't technically do PBIS, but we do like, so there are different programs. Typically, I think it's a guidance counselor thing that has, a lot of them have the 4 colors, the red, the yellow, the green, the blue, and then, so your zones of how you feel. I feel like a lot of schools teach that.
And may I add another question from our chat here?
Yes, ma'am.
One, we have people viewing online, and so we want to include some questions from chat, and it's related to that question. Do all teachers use these strategies in their respective classes, and does your school use district-wide or school-wide color charts?
Our school had, at one point, a school-wide color chart. Every classroom had it on the wall with the 4 basic colors. It was a program you could buy. I'm not sure that all our classrooms have it this year, but they did last year for sure. I know. I even had it in my badge. It was school, though. That wasn't a county initiative. That was a school-wide initiative. But I do know that a lot of schools buy into that program for their behavioral and needs zones of regulation. So it gives you your 4 basic colors to build off of. Oh, he has a mic. Sorry, he has a mic for you.
Comm strips and sensory strips are new to me. Can you tell me a little bit more about what they are and how students use them during class?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the comm strips, sensory strips, you can literally type that on Amazon, and there's literally going to be like 90 different kinds that come up. So I just have ones that are a rectangle, literally like half the size of this remote, and they're stickers. Most of them are stickers. I stick them to the student's desk, and there are typically different, I think they're almost like grit, like sandpaper, pebbly, that you can rub over and literally like just go like this. Some of them there's figure 8s that'll tell you when to breathe and when to let it out. There's circles, there's so many different types. Especially for my little ones who don't, probably can't read the word breathe, don't need all that. I just got the ones that are literally like this big and put it right on the corner of their desk. And like I said, I think I got them in a box of 50. So if they picked it off one day because they were upset or something, I'd be like, oh, that's okay. I have another one you can have if you want it. Just let me know. If it became an issue, I'd be like, look, if you do it again, you don't get another one. I did have some of those because they would just incessantly peel it off, and I was buying them. But Amazon has a ton of options for those.
I don't like the microphone. We don't have a specific thing for our school, but just in getting to spend some extra money, we found they're called A Little Spot of Emotions books, and they come with the little characters. They're not necessarily the same colors that you use, but they do have it labeled on the back, and there's a lot of things just out there that you can look at. They're just cute little spots with little feet on them.
I tell you, the kids love that one.
And they have individual books for each emotion to go through, and there's a scribble spot when you don't know what your emotion is, and it's all the colors, and that's me a lot of the time. But.
Yes, Little Spot of Emotion does have a set of books that you can buy the plushes for as well. We do have some interventionists that use Little Spot of Emotion, but yeah, those are awesome. I love those too. And the stories are fantastic.
I like to draw, and so I actually drew faces with different emotions on it, and I used different color paper, and then I laminated those. So I have those that I can actually use with my students, and so it helps to associate the color again because they can see a face with it. So.
Yes, sometimes visual supports are super important for our students and getting them to understand. And I would add that I also, when I would try to have, if I had a drawing of one, try to also have a real life picture of it so that the students see an actual person having that emotion on their face as well. Pairing them both together gives the students more than one dynamic to look at and to understand the emotion.
We have another question from here. How can you adapt some of these strategies that you talk about developing vocabulary to express emotions? How do you adapt or adjust some of these strategies to work with nonverbal students?
So she asked about adapting strategies to learn emotions and such to work with nonverbal students. And so I'm in that boat right now. I recently went into a CDC position, and I have students who are nonverbal who need communication skills. And I would urge you, and not all school systems have it, but I would urge you to make sure that if you have an assistive technology department, that if you have a nonverbal student, especially at a young age, to try to get them an AAC device, because the world changes for them when they have some type of consistent communication. And if they are completely nonverbal at 1st or 2nd grade, then they're probably going to need some type of communication device to be able to communicate in the future. The sooner you do it, the sooner they learn how to use it, and when they get into high school, they can have those skills already built up. What we don't want to do is wait till they're in high school to get them an AAC device, because then we've left years they haven't been able to communicate, and years that they've had to learn the device and be able to. We have some who have AAC devices who can go out in the workforce, but typically they've been using those AAC devices since they were little. Now I will tell you, I have been doing social emotional lessons with my CDC class, and so typically we focus on one emotion a week, and I just pull different YouTube videos and stories and social stories and books about that one specific emotion, and we watch it, and then we talk about it, and I show pictures of I've showed pictures of myself when I'm angry, like what my face looks like when I'm angry, because they know me. And I show pictures of, I have a set of flashcards that has like 6 different pictures of every emotion, of real life pictures. So I show them all of those. I show them animated pictures, all of those things, but it takes significantly longer for them to learn them. And if they're nonverbal, then they're never going to be able to tell you they're frustrated unless they have some form of communication. I mean, as you could even do a simple PEX board. I'm happy. When you talk about happy, pull out your PEX board and show them happy. If you have students who are using AAC devices, or you want to start using PEX systems which is a picture exchange communication system, you need to pull that into your lesson. So when you're teaching happy, you're also pulling up a picture of whatever PEX board or whatever communication system your students are using, showing them where the happy button is, and if it's a real communication device, you're letting the communication device say happy, or you're pointing to it and you're saying happy. Because then they know where to find that at. They know you've read the books, you've shown them the pictures, and they can find it in their communication systems as well.
A follow-up to that question is, for those nonverbal students who have goals of developing language, can that assistive device be a deterrent or be a support?
That's a good question for like speech and language. In my limited dealings with AAC and my dealings with the speech and language, it's not a deterrent. I have met people who feel strongly otherwise, that it will deter kids from getting language, but I have strong feelings that it's not a deterrent. If they use both, then they use both, but they have to have a consistent form of communication. And if they don't have all the words to verbally tell you how they feel, we have to give them something to use. Are there any more questions? All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Courtney. You know, Courtney has just given us a wealth of ideas to take right back to the classroom and use. And that is one of the goals we have in this collaborative, is to give practical suggestions that teachers can use. So I really thank you for that. I can see why you were nominated. And thank you for presenting today, Courtney. We have our next session coming is the Tennessee Department of Education, and it will be a panel right here. And Ms. Joanne Runyon is here right now, and the others will be here, and they're here as well. But we're going to take a break. And since we are on this recording schedule, I will ask that you be in your seat prior to 10:30. All right, we're going to take a break right now. It's 10:13, And please be in your seat. We'll start recording at 10:30. So let's take a break. Welcome to the Center for Educational Media. This is the SPED Collaborative coming from the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University. So we're about to have a really great session here with a panel from the Tennessee Department of Education. When we invited Susan Ussery to join us today, she suggested that she bring a group of her colleagues to bring a panel and to answer questions that have been submitted by teachers across the state of Tennessee regarding special education and the Tennessee Department of Education. So this panel presentation today will be framed in terms of the questions that were submitted by teachers to this panel of educators from the department. So Ms. Susan Ussery and Ms. Allison Gauld, Ms. April Ebinger, Dr. April Ebinger, and Ms. Joanne Runyon are here today with us. They will give further introduction, giving more background about their role and their experience. So thank you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing the conversation and the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. So I'm Susan Ussery. I am the Senior Director of Special Education Programs at the department, and here with some amazing colleagues, and we're happy to be here to try to address any questions that you have related to special education. I'm going to pass it to Allison.
So I'm Allison Gauld. I am the Low Incidence and Autism Coordinator. I'm also the lead of our professional development.
Hi, good morning. I'm April Ebinger. I'm the Director of Psychological and Behavioral Services for the department.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Runyon. I am the Senior Director for Intervention Programs. And so even though we're going to be talking about special education today, the role that my team and I play on this wonderful team is to serve students who need interventions, students who are English learners and are receiving instructional programming, intervention in that realm. So the areas that are addressed as student needs prior, I guess, to the services being received under IDEA.
And Dr. Clark and her team sent out some questions to the field in advance of this presentation. So we have some of those here, but we also want this to be a useful presentation for everybody here and online. So we're welcoming questions from the field, from folks that are joining us remotely, as well as you all here in the audience. So I'm going to just get us started and show you the main buckets of work or categories that most of the questions fell into. So these first are our three strategic priorities of the department, that academics, that all students have access to high quality instruction, and then student readiness, that we're equipping all students academically and non-academically for successful post-school outcomes, and that we want Tennessee to be a model state for educators. But we've done our introductions, and here are the main categories in which you all submitted questions. So the first one being progress monitoring and goal writing. So do we want to tackle some of the ones, team, that came in about progress monitoring first?
Sure. I think we'll start with the logistics of the requirements, and then we'll talk about how you actually implement that.
Do we want to repeat the question for them?
Sure. So one of the first questions that we received was, I would like to know how we are properly monitoring progress for high school using elementary, middle school probes instead of using grade level standards and classroom work.
Tricky question, right? I think we need to start using both. I know often we are using our progress monitoring tools, especially around those reevaluations, those triennial reevaluations, to determine if a child is still eligible under specific learning disability. You certainly can do that as a team, but we shouldn't not use or utilize the grade level assignments, assessments that are being given to that student in high school as we're making those determinations. I think we need to use both pieces of data and not just lean into our K-8 progress monitoring as we're making determinations for students. I think they're both valuable, but their value is being used in different manners. So in that case, we absolutely can use grade level classroom-based assessment, assignments, rubrics to determine if a student is responding to that intervention, responding to that instruction. And that may be more of an anecdotal narrative that you're providing in your, your progress monitoring report or your evaluation report, but both pieces of data are just as useful, and we have to ensure that the data that we're collecting and we're analyzing is meaningful for that student, and it's actually valid and reliable. So if we are using potentially an 8th grade probe for a high schooler, what does that mean for that student? Does that mean that they can't achieve grade level standards because they're still reading on potentially a middle school level? Not necessarily. And so really understanding and doing some item analyses as well with those probes is going to be in your best interest. But I think, again, the work and the assignments that they're able to do or not able to do in the classroom give you a really good understanding of where you need to go with your IEP goals, or potentially if you need to collect additional data through that reevaluation process. Allison, feel free. Please jump in here for me.
Sure. And then I think it becomes logistically, how do we monitor those IEP goals, right? So we've used both this classroom performance data as well as some of those probes to identify the skills for our goals. But then how do we manage that? Caseloads continue to grow and get larger. And I think there's a couple things that we forget. One is it is not just a special educator's job to progress monitor. So all of the individuals that are engaging with the student can play a role in a way that's authentic, right? So think about that student who perhaps is attending general education for English, right? Especially in high school, they need that credit. They're going to be attending. That English language arts teacher is able to take some progress monitoring data for you as well as the special educator perhaps during intervention. And then you have a way to say, does it matter what setting they're in? Does it matter whether the context of the skill is isolated or embedded authentically, right? So it is not all just you. I think the other thing is we get very stuck on like, this is my progress monitoring day, right? I will go into schools on a Friday and they're like, well, today is our progress monitoring day. You can spread this out so that you are progress monitoring 1 or 2 goals per class and then rotate your kids so that over the course of 2 weeks, all students have progress monitoring, but you're not doing all on that one day. That also allows for students to be absent where you don't end up losing their data continuously because they have a tendency to get the flu Thursday night, right? Not that any students would do that. So having a rotation, really building a schedule, you can see an example of that on our website, which is not always the easiest to navigate, I know, but on the low incidence webpage, there is actually a schedule created for how do we progress monitor a little bit at a time across the courses so that you can spread that out, and you can spread it out across all the adults, not just the special educators. So I think it's really about systematically planning when that happens and balancing that with the importance of instruction so that progress monitoring isn't the only intervention occurring for students.
One thing I would add about that is when you're developing your IEP goals is to really use all of the data that's available to you. I think oftentimes we rely on the school psychologist evaluation to drive everything, but there are so many sources of data that need to be used when you're developing goals for your students so that they are meaningful. So we're making sure that they actually have access to that Tier 1 instruction rather than looking at isolated skills that may have been identified during a standardized assessment. So remember that we've got to make the connection to the classroom. The student is a student to be educated along all of their other peers, so that needs to be the primary objective, is to make sure that they have that access, that we're not working on something in isolation that is not connected to the curriculum. Those were the primary questions we received in this area, but we want to take a moment and ask you all here or folks online if you have any specific questions related to progress monitoring or goal writing. All right, nothing online? All right, let's see. So here was one of the other areas that there were a lot of questions about was least restrictive environment. And I think just one, we need to understand what least restrictive environment is. And Allison does a ton of work on that and just trying to help folks understand that it is not just a place. I think folks often think of least restrictive environment as just the general education classroom, and that is not, in fact, what it means. And I don't remember if we got specific questions that you wanted to tackle, but this
I
isn't.
don't know that we had specific questions, no, but it is a common question on LRE being general ed. And LRE is not. If the federal government meant that LRE was general ed, they would call it general ed. They're not that creative, right? When they named it something else, that was with great purpose and intent, that we were looking specifically at the student and deciding class by class, minute by minute, where is their least restrictive environment, meaning they have the greatest potential access to general education and general education peers while still benefiting from that program. Notice I say not maximizing their benefit, right? I think we could all develop a plan where a child absolutely maximizes how much they grow, but there's a lot of cost to that. And so this is really balancing the need to be engaged in general education to the greatest extent possible while still benefiting. Notice I also said minute by minute, class by class. If a student needs self-contained for English language arts, that does not mean they're in the self-contained setting for the day. It means you've decided where English language arts is occurring. You also need to even consider like arrival. What does that look like? Lunchtime, what does that look like? What does it look like in high school or middle school where they're exchanging classes? All of that should be considered within your least restrictive environment, which notice is not necessarily services. They're different. So least restrictive environment is how do we ensure the greatest access to general education while also ensuring progress. And it is hard. It is tricky. There are times in our career with students where we're kind of guessing because we don't have enough data. We've never tried it, right? Think about that student that goes from elementary school where they're with the same teacher all the time. And now they're going to go to middle school and they're going to exchange classes. We're guessing what that transition will look like. And so that's where we really need to lean into the least dangerous assumption that we assume they can do it. Think about it. If a student comes into kindergarten, I love kindergarten, it's a lottery. You have no idea what you're getting in that kindergarten room until they show up because they just enroll. But when those students come, some of them have better skills at being able to sit on their bottom and listen for 15, 20 minutes without losing attention, and some don't, whether they have a disability or not. But both are benefiting. So us looking and saying we know they have an IEP and over-planning is not the least dangerous assumption. We need to assume they can be successful. We need to assume that we can create the accommodations and supports to achieve that, and only when that does not happen should we consider other placements. And that's really what the LRE is it's a decision-making plan around balancing the needs of general education as well as the needs for the students to progress. Did I miss something?
I don't think so. I just want to add, so I have gotten a lot of questions recently around students who are identified under specific learning disabilities, especially once they get to high school setting, and so I want you to jump in here. I think there was maybe some miscommunication, misunderstanding, whether it was in our previous RTI manual or just some assumptions districts had made that all students with SLD had to be in an intervention block. Right. Can you speak? Yes. Can you speak to that, please?
Thanks for pointing that out. So there is an intervention course code available in high school for one specific purpose, and that is that should a student require as their LRE intensive intervention, we don't want them to be at risk at not accumulating credits. Notice I said, should a student require. I did not say IEP students require, right? Or students with an IEP require. And we'll see those words in policies. So if you see that policy, feel free to have an email come to us so that we can clarify. But it is really and truly there as a option in order to ensure that high schools can provide a full continuum of alternate services and supports available to students. So only if a student requires intervention should we consider that, and we provided that intervention course code in class so that they can continue to earn credit. And that is a 1-credit class. It can count as an elective, or it can count in that focused area so that our students are not at risk because they need intervention. But it is not a requirement for a student with an IEP to participate in that course if that is not appropriate. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we need to get you a mic.
Yeah, we're supposed to get a microphone, so there's a runner somewhere. Here he comes.
Sorry, up front.
Thank you. So to piggyback on that, I think that there's some questions that we have heard as well about, well, when we're doing the monitoring for the IEPs, that every PLEP that's exceptional, has a goal, that has a service, that has et cetera. And so trying to discern whether service means a direct pull-out versus a consultation or an accommodation or those types of other things. Can you speak a little bit more to that to help clarify for those who may have questions about how to tie those in and to make sure that we are matching up with what the state's expectation is for the monitoring piece, but we're also definitely honoring LRE as it's intended?
For sure. I'm happy to address that. I think that's a great and common question. So yes, if you've identified a deficit for a student, you need to make sure you've done something to overcome it, right? So if you've said this is a concern, do something about it. But what something is again decided by the IEP team. So in some cases, it is consultation. You might have someone that's consulting, meaning working with the other adults, pretend these are all the educators that work with the student, on strategies they're going to embed in the classroom and supports they're going to provide regularly that helps the student overcome or compensate for that deficit. We especially see that in high school because they're getting ready to be grown-ups, right? It's about time for them to move on and be independent. We need to figure out how to set them up for that success. It might be that that service is occurring in general education where another individual is coming into the classroom and providing services, maybe even where we don't see it directly with the student, but that there's small group or station learning or one of the other co-teaching models in place. It might be that it's pull-out, but a pull-out does not have to be bell to bell. So it might be, for example, English language arts, the students are all reading a novel or reading a story, and the student has had access to that through auditory book. They know the story, they engage in the conversation, but then when it comes time for some independent writing, they go to another setting where they get some very intensive intervention in the skill of writing, all within that same block. It's really decided for the kid. And so we need to be careful that when we think of goal and service, that we recognize that that service is the full continuum. And we just want to see you're doing something to address the deficit you identified. What that something is decided by the team.
I would also say, too, that, that you may have a student who has an IEP, but that doesn't mean that every course requires a goal or a service. So it could be that a student has a deficit in reading, and they may be struggling in math, but that doesn't mean that automatically math should be added to their IEP and given additional services. So we really need to be looking at serving that student in the least restrictive environment. We hope that that's general education for most students, and the expectation is that that's where they are started and provided the supplemental aids and services necessary to keep them in general education, to be educated alongside their peers. And then if all of those strategies and supports and accommodations are not effective, that's when we start looking at different settings. But as Allison said, it is not just an automatic change or move of placement for their entire day or entire course. It may just be pieces of their day, depending on their deficit that was identified in the present levels. And I think kind of tying back to that goal progress monitoring, those need to be revisited annually. Just because they had a particular setting one year doesn't mean that that's not going to change. So that's why it's so important to collect ongoing data rather than just sticking with the report that was done from the initial evaluation or the most recent reevaluation. Use all of that data. I think also for LRE, an important part of that conversation that we also got some kind of related questions was about that collaboration between general education and special education. If a student is found to be a student with a disability, that does not mean that that student is just a special education student now. That student is a student first, and that general education teacher has just as much responsibility for that student's education as the special education teachers and related service providers. So it's finding a way to work together to really provide whatever supports and interventions are necessary collaboratively so that that student has access. So it's not about ownership of a student, it's not about ownership of goals or services, it's how are we all working together to find a successful path for this student.
Right. I think you hit on an important thing too, is that the services aren't tied to courses. We tend to think schedule, we tend to want the service page to look like a schedule for ourselves and the students, but it's not tied to courses. For example, we have lots of high schools that are on block schedule, so a class is only one semester long. They'll say that the student needs reading support in English language arts. English language arts is one semester. So what you're saying is that the student only has a reading deficit 3 months a year? I don't believe that's true, right? We need to be providing that reading across the day. So the service should be around the reading skill, and that can be provided wherever. There's a lot of reading skills required for social studies. It's a lot of nonfiction text, right? There's a lot needed in science, and frankly, math anymore is more text than numbers. So there's a lot of ways to integrate it, but it's really thinking about what the student needs and how we provide that. Did I miss anything?
Questions kind of related to least restrictive environment?
As it pertains to LRE, if a student has been placed in EBS, the extended behavior support, and that student goes out to a residential facility and successfully completes it, when they return, should they be placed right back into the EBS, or should we reconsider that situation because there's the possibility of lapsing back in those previous behaviors?
I guess it depends too on who placed the student in the residential. There's different pathways to get to a residential program, as many of you guys know. If it was an IEP team decision, then absolutely you want to wean that child as best as possible back into that general education setting. But oftentimes, what we're seeing across the state, our parents and physicians are making decisions to send students to day treatment programs, residential facility programs outside of that IEP team decision. So please collaborate to the best of your ability. I would always recommend you guys sign a release of information between that residential day treatment program and the school. They may not be able to give you all the information based on how HIPAA has some obviously different regulations than FERPA does, but it'll allow you to know what was successful, what they were working on in that residential facility. And then I would always recommend a transition meeting to come back. And at that time, at that transition meeting, you can talk about LRE placement. Is that EBS program still appropriate? Or has this residential facility remediated a lot of the concerns that would allow the student to access more opportunities in their school day? Would I say blanket statement they should always re-enter at that exact LRE? No, I could never make that justification. But I think that transition meeting is the appropriate time to look at all the data, collect whatever has been collected during that residential stay, and then make that determination on a case-by-case basis for that student.
For sure, and I would just add that while an IEP must be completed annually, it can be held far more often, and especially in situations where students are returning to the school for a variety of reasons, right? Whether it be mental health or physical health or some other reason. I think it's important that we at least even schedule a check-in on where we are with the student, because that is a lot for everybody. But you can have those IEP meetings more often. So if you plan and say, oh, I think they're going to need to be in that, behavior program that's pretty intensive at first, but you see that they really are thriving, meet and acknowledge that and celebrate it and plan again. I know nobody wants to have extra meetings, but it is better to plan for success than to be stuck and held to an IEP that's no longer appropriate.
I think you spurred something in me too. We have seen such a huge uptick in our administrative complaints. Many of you guys know this, over 100% increase in our administrative complaints annually since COVID, which is really a lot. And a lot of those are based on those decisions that the IEP team is making, where we see over the years the students not making progress, right? We have those progress reports that show that they're at a 5, that Likert scale. They're going to meet the goal by the end of the IEP. Then that IEP comes and it ends. The new IEP goes into effect. You have the same justification in your progress reports, the student's going to meet goals. And then you have an advocate come and bring all of these IEPs where the goals have never changed, LRE has never changed, and the students not making progress. I know many of you have probably heard me say this if you've ever attended my trainings, but it's the airport motto. If you see something, say something. And if you see that this child is not making progress, it's always in your best interest. Call a meeting and talk about what needs to happen. Maybe additional assessments need to happen. Maybe there's a new disability eligibility that needs to be considered that hasn't been. Maybe there's other factors, mental health factors, behavioral factors that are impeding that student's ability to make growth and progress. But do something about it. Where districts err is when they sit on it and they say, we'll talk about that once we get to the IEP meeting. And the IEP meeting may not be for 6 months. At that point, it's always in your best interest, as Allison said, go ahead and call a meeting just to document. Could we be doing anything different, and should we be?
And with that, one of the excuses for not making progress cannot be that the student is unmotivated, uninterested, or cannot. It really is an adult problem when students are not making progress, and so we need to continue to change and try. Will they make progress? Not necessarily, but we need to be trying new things and acknowledging that they're not making that progress rather than sitting on it or saying it's about the student.
I'd like to focus some on the multilingual learners who are receiving special education services. And, you know, a continual dilemma that we have as educators is how to differentiate language acquisition issues with language learning issues and special needs in terms of language and reading in multilingual learners. Do we have any new information on that? Any new strategies for assessing and identifying multilingual learners with language needs or with disabilities?
That's a great question. That's a great point, Dr. Clark. And so one of the things that we still hold very close is database decision making. So understanding that when we're working especially with our English learners, that we need to be looking at a multitude of data sources. So we know that with our English learners, not only are we getting the assessment information, for example, that Allison and April have talked about, but we also have another component to consider, which is limited English proficiency. And so we need to make sure that when these decisions are being made for students, as far as what appropriate supports are, that we have our ESL specialists, our ESL coordinators, our teachers involved in that decision making, because that specialist, that expert, is going to help bring knowledge about what proper language development looks like. When we're talking about how English develops, the other team members will be able to bring their perspective on and what they see in the data about how a student is performing, and that's when those collaboration conversations happen when we're looking at this data. I know that April has done some work, actually a lot of work in this area. She actually has a community of practice, and I don't want to butcher the title, April, so.
I don't even remember what it's called, to be honest with you. It is recorded. It's on our professional development website. I think we'll be sharing our contact information, so feel free to shoot me an email if you would like to get that. It really is talking about, as you said, Dr. Clark, the differences between language difference and then a disability, and how do you flesh that out? And it takes a lot of assessment. It takes a lot of collaboration. But I think where we err is we make a lot of assumptions about students and language acquisition. I was actually consulting this morning with a district on a student who is newly to the United States, has some marked concerns behaviorally, also has some hearing issues, some PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, based on the move of where they came from. And the team is really quickly trying to move to an eligibility, as opposed to let's step back, let's collect a lot of data, let's do a really great ethnographic interview with the family. Let's really dig into their progress with language acquisition. Let's look at their siblings. It's so multifaceted, and every profile is going to be different. There's no uniform answer here. Just like when we say, when you meet one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, right? It's the same with our English language learners, and we can't make assumptions on their backs and say that they have a disability when in fact it could be a language difference. So feel free always, if you have a tricky case, to reach out to Joanne. Dr. Richardson is our Director of Intervention. Reach out to me. Can really talk through what assessments may be appropriate, talk through other pieces that you may want to consider as you're looking at our ESL students. Always happy to do that with you guys.
And I'm going to put in a plug for your speech language pathologists. They are a really important team member when you're doing any assessments to really help discern, as April said, what is language acquisition versus what is potentially a language disability. And really, if the child has a language disability, it's going to exist in both languages. So it is not just going to be related to English. And so that's why it is so important to do the ethnographic interview, collect all of the data, talk to the families, which likely is going to require a translator. But I think one thing assessment specialists need to hear is don't try to make the current test that you have sitting on your shelf fit a student. If it's not appropriate, if it's not normed on them in that language, use other tools. It's really, the purpose is to evaluate that student and identify if there's a disability, not whether or not they scored a particular level on a test. And so that's going to require a lot of sources of data, a lot of conversations, a lot of observations. As April said, comparison to the development with peers. Talk to the family. Are they struggling even in their native language to communicate? So just really digging in and giving yourself permission that you might have to break away from the typical test that you would use to evaluate language or some other disability, and use sources that are out there that are more appropriate.
I do think it's important to remind you that this is all about spoken language. So for students whose primary language is ASL, there are a lot of language acquisition concerns around our students who are deaf or significantly hard of hearing, and that they are missing just that residual conversation that's occurring around them. But English language learning is around spoken language. So these are not students who should be assessed using like our state WIDA test or any other English language learner test, because it's about spoken, not about the fact that they have a visual or alternate language system.
And may I continue questioning related to that? In smaller districts, or even in some larger districts, staffing issues, including interim staffing, temporary staffing, lack of qualified staffing, may prevent us from calling on this group of different professionals in the district or in the school to support services. How do we address when schools have a shortage of staffing, of qualified staffing, speech and language pathologists, school psychologists, interventionists? Do you have suggestions for districts who are struggling with staffing and with lower resources?
I will say we have heard loudly of the staffing shortages across the state, and we hear you, and we certainly understand the predicament you're in. What we really would caution you against, we just had some recent, I think 2 administrative complaints around using unqualified, uncredentialed staff to work outside of their scope. Please be cautious of that. We would much prefer you call an IEP meeting and you have an honest, transparent conversation with parents saying, we do not have a paraprofessional, a paraeducator to work with your child based on the set forth IEP. This is our plan moving forward, how we will continue to support, and here is our consideration of compensatory services and what we're going to do in the future. We would much prefer you do that proactively rather than reactively, because typically those parents are then reaching out to us saying, well, they haven't followed the IEP as it's written. In terms of the related service providers, please reach out to myself. Jamie Seek is our speech and language pathologist coordinator at the state. We have a lot of initiatives right now around Grow Your Own for SLPs and school psychs. We also have a federal grant that is providing school psych interns to 40 of our rural districts. We have a lot of initiatives going on, and if you are not a part of those or you're not aware of what those are, please reach out to me as well. We would love to get you looped in so you know what's happening across the state to try to fill those vacancies. We certainly can help put the word out by getting you in touch with your local state agencies where you can post positions on your state sites, on your national sites. We certainly can help kind of navigate that for you, and then also give you other ideas of what you can do if you are missing one of those critical related service providers. Susan, Allison, any other?
It is not an easy time right now, for sure, in special education. And we know that you all are all taxed and challenged with tremendous caseloads and not enough staff to meet their needs. I think one thing, and we do have some resources at the end of this, is know that compensatory services are not punitive. And in some cases, that's just something that needs to be provided to a student if there was not staff available to meet their services that are outlined in their IEP. And it is not a negative. It is not something that you all should see as being viewed upon, you didn't do your job. It just is truly a lack of staff. And it's a conversation, as April said, I think be upfront with parents. I mean, I think they know the challenges that are occurring in schools around staffing, but be upfront, try to have a plan, include them in that conversation so that they don't find out 6 months down the road that this student has missed hours and, months of services. Did you have something you want to add?
I would say that they're kind of hitting on something that I just want to call out more directly, is that it is still, even in the light of the staffing shortages, which we're very aware of, it's not a quick fix, right? It's just going to take a while to get sufficient programs and sufficient people through. But even in this moment, it's still critical your IEP reflects what the student needs, not what you believe you have the capacity to provide. And if you don't have the capacity, have that conversation. But if you're tempering your IEPs by what you have, that is a problem. And so you really need to make sure that the IEP is reflective of the student needs, and then have that honest conversation with parents. Parents are great. Parents are kind when we're honest. When we're not honest, they have every reason to distrust us. And so just have that honest conversation with them. More often than not, you're able to brainstorm together. But if you're not honest from the front, it will be an uphill challenge, and it will be a challenge that you've kind of created for yourself. So make sure you have exactly what the student needs reflected accurately.
I think too, just to echo that it doesn't negate your child find obligations. So if you don't have a school psychologist or an SLP, it doesn't mean that you can just say, we're not going to assess your child because we don't have anybody to assess your child. We are still bound under our child find obligations. If we suspect a disability, we move forward and we evaluate. And so you may need to reach out to your district leadership to figure out how to best do that, but you still are required to meet your child find obligations under state and federal law.
And those are really kind of connected. The last couple bullet points there really are connected, because child find and capacity really do kind of go hand in hand. But certainly there's a lot of initiatives we're trying to take on, and we hear the challenges, absolutely. But as I hear Allison say this all the time, the IEP is not in a program and a plan for an adult, it's for the child. So we really have to continue to provide what is necessary for that student, individualize it, and make sure that we are doing everything we can to meet their needs, not the needs of the adults in the building.
Part of that is going back to your earlier question around, does it automatically become that they take intervention in high school, right? If we're not basing database decisions, if we're not systematically thinking about what students need, we do find that we've created these defaults that almost create a problem of capacity in and of themselves. So it's really important that the IEP truly is individualized to each student, because we might find that some of that capacity, and some schools have found that like they had a whole litany of high schoolers perhaps in like algebra AB who didn't even have a math deficit, they just had an IEP. So that reduced a lot of that capacity pool. So part of it is also just database decision-making for each and every child on their own individual needs.
Absolutely. And I would say too, for the related service providers too, making sure that your goals are connected to the content that they should be receiving in their classroom, not isolated skills, and it's not that they need to master the standardized assessment that's going to be administered upon the reeval. That's not the purpose of education. That's not the purpose of their IEP. It's not about their standardized test score. It's how are they accessing content and curriculum, so their goals need to be connected to content and curriculum. And so if we can kind of do some evaluation of your IEPs and look at students, what are the goals that are written? Are they appropriate for that child to be able to access ELA or math? Or am I working on skills that showed up on a test but really don't translate to functional skills within the classroom? And maybe reevaluating some of the goals, how services are written, are they individualized? Are they written for truly the skill deficits, or have we just made assumptions because the student is a student with a disability and we're putting them in more intensive restrictive classes?
We have a question up front.
I think we can all be impressed with my patience to wait for the microphone, because I tend to.
I'll give you points for that. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so speaking on that, talk more about access to the standard without expectation for mastering the standard, and how that relates to LRE and decisions for students, especially as we bridge middle and high school, and the test that all the decisions are driven about. But it's not about the test. So please talk about that.
Well, let me ask you all a question first to kick off that discussion. What percentage or proportion, whichever you prefer, of standards must a student master in order to receive the regular diploma? I'm hearing some like 70, 80, 0. It's 0. Now, how do I know that? One, I was asked that question while presenting to the State Board of Education on live view across the entire state in front of my commissioner and had to answer, and she acknowledged that indeed I was correct. But two, I have a lot of degrees. And I know nothing about social studies and U.S. history. I know World War II's after World War I because I'm good at math, right? But I know nothing. We don't actually have to master standards to graduate. We have to demonstrate learning. So when we are saying that a student with an IEP must show mastery before they can participate or before they can engage in that classroom, we are actually holding them to a significantly higher standard than we are holding students without disabilities. Well, that's not equitable at all. So the reality is that mastery is a myth. It's about learning. And learning's hard to measure, and it's hard to know when learning's enough, right? I always say it's like nailing Jell-O to a tree. It's really messy, and you don't know what you're going to get when you're done. But that is what school is. And if we all reflect back to our engagement in school, we'll realize that, yes, we earned grades, but those grades were activities primarily designed by a teacher. They didn't necessarily show mastery of anything, but they showed that you were like listening and paying attention and you started to think. Mastery is not the goal. The goal is learning. And hopefully we're all still doing that. I know I'm learning that I don't like I-24, but hopefully we're all still learning, right? Good question. What did I miss?
No, that's a great question. Great answer. Well, I know we've got about 5 minutes. Did you want to add something, April?
No, about that. No, I was just going to say there was a couple other, just because I know that many of you guys know that the RTI manual has been redone and modified, just reminding you guys that we have taken the position, if you have looked at the new RTI manual, you'll notice that all the mentions of data points and weeks and interventions and fidelity checks has been removed, and that just to caution you guys, we are not delaying, denying an evaluation for a specific learning disability based on a process. If anybody ever is talking or documenting, well, we can't evaluate Johnny because he's not in intervention. We can't evaluate because we don't have enough data points. We're doing it wrong. Okay, so make sure we are kind of pivoting with our language and we're evaluating where we suspect a disability, not basing that on the process. Those two things can happen concurrently. I suspect Johnny has a specific learning disability. He can be enrolled in a tiered intervention, doesn't matter which one, right? And we can collect data as we evaluate. But the process should never be used to delay or deny an evaluation for a student. Just read a prior written notice this past week that said that. He could not be evaluated because he wasn't performing below the 25th percentile. We don't have 10th percentile, 25th percentiles. We have students who may need additional evaluation supports, and we evaluate students.
You triggered something in my head too, because it kind of ties into the capacity and Dr. Clark's question about, when you don't have the number of assessment specialists necessary. I know a lot of districts are relying on contracted outside providers to do your evaluations and your assessments and provide services as well. But remember, they are still held to the same Tennessee eligibility evaluation standards. And so what they may do in their medical or clinical setting often does not mirror what the expectation is in education, but that is what the expectation is. They cannot conduct assessments in a clinical model and then determine eligibility that way. They still have to follow our evaluation standards. So I just wanted to.
And as a reminder with that, they are a member of the team, not the team.
Exactly.
Just as a parent is a member, not the team. So even if you feel that there's a little disconnect, they are one member.
And the school is ultimately responsible. I think we.
Going exactly where I was going to go. Let's plug resources
Okay,
before we
so
have
yes.
we have 50 seconds.
We're approaching the end of our session, so I just wanted to highlight a couple of the resources that we have available, some of them connected to what we spoke about today. The Tennessee Technical Assistance Network is a network that the state supports. We have multiple partners that are basically an extension of the department to help provide additional support, so you can access that there. We've got our special education framework, our TN Pulse manual and quick guides, and then other additional programming resources. I know we talked about the compensatory education, some of the service delivery options, all of those are listed here. Some FAQs about amending IEPs. So just know that all of these can be found on our website, but if you can't find them, you can reach out to any of us. And here is our contact information.
And I know we're over time.
Joanne's not on there.
Can I say
Yes.
one more thing? I know we're over time. Sorry, Dr. Clark. We do hold monthly communities of practice across the buckets of work. So I know I hold them for assessment specialists. We hold them for instructionally appropriate IEPs. You guys hold them for characteristics of dyslexia, intervention, EL. Please, if you don't have those calendars, reach out to us. We would love to have you attend to get that information.
Thank you. And if you have a moment to take the survey, please do let us know how we're doing.
I can't thank you enough, because the fact that we have 4 or 5 people willing to come and sit with us for 45 minutes today and be available to talk and answer questions is a real gift. And so it makes me believe that our department is accessible to the practitioners of Tennessee. That is also a goal of the collaborative here. So thank you very much. And please, here is their QR code. Capture it, give some feedback. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break, but during this break, you'll see this QR code from the department. You will also see the QR code from the collaborative, and this is your opportunity to request topics for future sessions and to nominate practitioners for future sessions. Great special education practitioners in Tennessee. So please get on both of these QR codes, give us some feedback, and we appreciate your presence here and your time. So thank you very much. Let's take a break and we will reassemble at 11:30. Please be in your seats at 11:30. Are you Misty?
Yes.
Welcome to the Center for Educational Media at Middle Tennessee State University's College of Education. This is the SPED Collaborative, and we are about to have our next session. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Misty Birch Pritchett. She is an instructional coach at Red Bank High School in Hamilton County. And so she was nominated by people in the SPED Collaborative to present. And her topic today is accommodations on the fly. So Dr. Birchett, so happy you're here today, and please continue your introduction. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Birch. A lot of people at my high school just call me by my last name, Birch. So it's kind of interesting to hear my whole formal name out loud like that. So here are some credentials I have. I'm an instructional coach. I've been in that role for a couple years. I have been a special education teacher for the majority of my career. I've got, this December will actually be 20 years for me. And then I have a master's in special education, and then I have my doctorate in educational leadership. When I was coming up with this presentation and thinking about, this is something that is close to my heart. And so I'm like, how can I tie this into what teachers need? And so the next two slides are going to be directly related to the teacher evaluation system. I kept it kind of broad, but it's talking about your differentiated instruction and materials. Here's the evaluation indicator. Delivery of instruction, we're looking specifically at differentiation, differentiating through the lesson, the knows and when and how to scaffold. Flexible groupings within your classroom, and then appropriate times to use those groupings. So another question I want to answer is why accommodations on the fly? My husband's a fly fisherman, so when I started doing this presentation, I was like, this is what it is. It's accommodations on the fly sometimes, because you're not always able to plan ahead in a classroom. You're not always able to go to those PDs and go to those PLCs and all the other planning meetings with your fellow teachers, especially if you're a special education teacher. So these are things you can do on the fly, but these are also things that a general education teacher can do. Okay, so I took my ideas and I put them into 4 categories. So you've got actions and verbal, and then we have paper, pencil, and technology. So with actions within the classroom, we talk about proximity. We hear that a lot from our administration, proximity, proximity. Proximity is mostly when you're targeting like a behavior, somebody is talking when they shouldn't be. It could be to get someone's attention. It's very different from walking the room. When you're walking the room, that's when you're checking in to see if kids are getting what you're teaching. Are they actually learning? So very similar ideas, but very different ways to use them. Another strategy I would use is ask 3 and then me. And it could be ask 2. I'll just like 3 because it rhymes. So ask 3 and then me. So your students in the classroom, you have set this up where they have a question. Did they ask a friend? Did they ask a neighbor? And then they can come and ask you. It helps the transitioning from in and out of their seat. And then let's talk about purposeful breaks. So at the high school level, some of my teachers that I'm working with right now as an instructional coach, we had some conversation about breaks. We have 80-minute blocks, and that's a really long time to be sitting in your seat, focusing on, your AP history or your chemistry. So they do purposeful breaks. So it's not like, okay, in the middle of the class, we're going to stop and we're going to take a break. But it's when they naturally come to an end of an assignment and then they take a break. The next bullet point, walk in their shoes, sit in their seats. So we all know about classroom arrangements, right? setting up your classroom. And so one thing that's very important is to look at the setup of your classroom to make sure every student can be involved in the lesson. So, for example, it's okay if I sit down, right? Yeah? Okay. So let's say this student, the way the table's set up, they're facing this way, and the presenter, the teacher's here. What's going to happen with the student? They're going to turn, they're going to be distracted. So by sitting in a student's seat, you get to see what they see. Also, when you sit in a student's seat, think about that student and what they're dealing with that day. And it's a really humbling experience to actually sit and do that. I've done that in several classrooms for several students, and I think about things like, how did they get to school that day? Was it on the noisy bus? So when they got to me that morning, my goodness, they are so overloaded. So did the student come in knowing that, oh my gosh, we might have a sub today? All this anticipation. And so when you're in your classroom, and whether it's inclusion, resource, whatever it may be, and you think about where the student is sitting and thinking about what they've been through, it helps you better be able to serve that student. So this is kind of weird because I'm hearing my echo, and I'm not used to people talking back. So thank you guys for being patient with me. This is, to be honest with you, this is outside of my comfort zone. But I feel like it's something that I want to do. I want to talk about this. I feel like it's super important. So I'm doing it. So let's talk about verbal. So let's talk about our prep work and mini conferences. So mini conferences. So you're thinking about your classroom, and you're thinking about all the students in your classroom, and you need to talk to them about their grades, or you need to talk to them about their behavior plans or IEP goals or whatever it may be. Do a little prep work, and that might not be but just a second to pull up their grades on your screen and close out your other tabs. And then pull them to the side, not necessarily at their desk, but at your desk or out in the hallway, and have that conversation with them. So I see that you're missing this assignment in your chemistry class. Let's talk about that. That small little thing lets the student know that you're caring about them and that you prepared for them. Questioning techniques. So when you're in your lesson and you know you have a student that's not quite understanding the material. You have a student that's a little bit struggling with the concept that you're teaching. You're going to ask them clarifying questions, not to that student, but to maybe a student sitting beside them. Make sure that when you're asking that question, it's actually what you want an answer to. So you're leading up to that. So if you're reading a story and you want to focus in on a character, maybe the student that's struggling, you know that they can answer the character question, but maybe not answering what's going on. So planning your questions out as you're in the moment is important. The power of the Post-it note. This is something that I love to do, even as an instructional coach for my teachers now. So when I'm in a teacher's room and I see that they're doing something really amazing, I leave a little Post-it note that says, hey, what you just did was amazing. And teachers save those. I have a dear, dear friend that I call him my supervisor, but he's not really my supervisor. And he came in my classroom and he gave me some great feedback. And I wrote him a little Post-it note just telling him thank you for being here. At the end of the school year, this, my supervisor, showed me he had kept that Post-it note all year. For on those rough days, he looked back at that Post-it note and was like, okay, I'm doing this for the right reason. Same with your students. If you see they're just really rocking out an assignment, some kids don't like that verbal praise out loud. They want a little quiet encouragement. So writing on a Post-it note, "You're doing amazing," or "I'm so proud of you." The power of that Post-it note, that's an accommodation right there that's quiet and just very powerful. Also, for curbing behaviors. If you see a student in and out of their seat, if you see a student that just won't stop talking to their neighbor, walk over, put the Post-it note on their desk, say, "Hey, every time you talk to your neighbor, or every time you get out of your seat, whatever your target behavior is, I'm gonna put a mark on this. You're not in trouble, I just wanna see how many times you're doing this." One of two things will happen. The kid will want to mark the marks themselves, or they're gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I'm doing that a lot." And that'll curb that behavior. And that's something you can do quietly to not bring attention to it to the rest of the class. The next bullet point I found happens a lot in high school, not necessarily as much in elementary school. Who are you truly calling on? So I'm giving a lecture, and I'll say, "Okay, so what is the capital of Florida?" What's going to happen in that moment? Everybody's going to call out. And there's going to be a student that calls out the right answer, and there's going to be a couple students who don't call out the right answer, and I say, "Good job," and I move on. What was the right answer? I really noticed this when I was in a Spanish class, because I don't know Spanish, very small. And the teacher asked for the Spanish version of a word, and all the kids yelled out something different. She heard the right word, and she's like, "Great, yes, let's move on." And I'm like, whoa, I don't know what the word is. And in that moment, I was like, wow, who are you truly calling on? Who are we truly highlighting here? So making sure that when you're posing those questions, you do it in a way that the person, the student, knows that you're calling on them, and that is the right answer. Okay, I'm going to go back. There we go. So let's say you're in that moment and you do that where you say, "What's the answer?" And the whole class calls out. And you're like, wow, I heard a lot of different responses. Turn to your neighbor. Tell your neighbor your answer. And at that moment is when you could walk the room and see who's saying the right answer. And it doesn't take but a second to do it. And then you can refocus the students. So, for the holiday season, so many teachers love to give kids crossword puzzles or fill in the blank. And it's a fun activity. And usually there's some sort of points involved. Like you can have 10 extra points on your test, or you can substitute this for one of the assignments. And so it's supposed to be this fun activity. But what if you have a student who has dyslexia and you give them a crossword puzzle? That's not very fun. When I was teaching elementary, was when I thought about this, and I was like, this is not great. We need to have some accommodations for this. So when you're planning those fun activities, and you're planning for like the kids to do some sort of holiday thing, let's give them some choices. So instead of just having a crossword puzzle, let's think about other things that they could do. Maybe they want to do a coloring sheet where they're going to color in, the correct answers for certain things. Or maybe we have a fill in the blank. Or maybe it's simply that they get to turn that paper over on the back, the crossword puzzle, and they get to write about what's their favorite part of their holiday. So when you plan out these fun activities, have a couple of activities that are different choices. that still relate to what you're trying to do. If it's a fun holiday activity, it's kind of more open. If you're trying to hit a certain standard, just focus in on what that standard is and have some choices for those kids so those fun activities don't become dreaded activities. So, graphic organizers. When we're talking about paper pencil in the classroom, let me tell you guys a story. So I was an inclusion teacher for a biology class. And I'm in there, and the teacher had colored pencils, and she had all these great things for her science notebooks. And so she had her notes on the board, and then she just started lecturing and talking about the notes and calling on kids. And she was a wonderful teacher. And at the end of the class, I realized that not a lot of kids had taken notes. And so this, a couple days of this, and then we did a notebook check. And hardly any of the kids had wrote down the notes. And she was just very stumped at why did this happen? I've got the colored pencils, I've got the outlines, this is so much fun. And I was like, well, can I try something? And she's like, sure. And it was one of those moments, I'm sure none of you have experienced this, where she didn't quite trust me. It's like, who's this lady in my classroom? Why is she here? And she's like, sure, okay, you can try something. And so I started using graphic organizers with the kids. And when I say a graphic organizer, it wasn't something I printed off online. It was just, if she had 4 topics that she was going to talk about, I drew 4 circles on a paper, showed it to the kids, they drew the same thing, and then we went on with our notes. I know one day we took paper and we folded it in 4 corners. Y'all remember foldables, right? Yes. It doesn't have to be something that's pre-planned. You can just look at what the material is and trying to figure out a sort of a picture for the kids to fill in the blanks. The next time we did the notebook check, almost every child had notes in their notebook from this. And they had colored, and it was wonderful. And so that built that relationship with me and that teacher. And it also showed the kids like how to take notes, what the important things are. Okay, sticking with paper pencil for right now. The role of highlighters. So you've created this wonderful test, or your regular education teacher that you're supporting has created this wonderful test, and then you realize you didn't do a accommodated version. You didn't make it a shortened assignment, or you didn't keep it, to a word bank or some of the things. What you can do at that moment, and I have done this, is I highlight the questions I want that student or those students to complete. So they get this 50-question test and their eyes bug out of their heads and they're like, oh, I can't do this. And then I go by and I'm like, okay, I want you to do these parts. And I highlight those things. Now I'm gonna warn you, don't highlight just the odds and evens. Highlight the things that you want that student to show mastery on. Sometimes, especially it seems like in math, like the first couple questions, 3 questions on a page are like the same kind of format. And then you hit number 4 and it throws you a curve, it gives you a fraction or something, always, right? So going through that test and picking out the ones that student can show mastery on, very important. And then they don't feel that overwhelming urge to, oh my gosh, I have to finish the whole thing. You can give them the option if they would like to, but knowing that you've highlighted just those things that are important. And going to more than just odds and evens, think about what you want the student to show mastery on. So, usually in a reading assignment, you have a couple of like short answers in the very beginning. And so you don't want the students to do just the first 5 or the first 10 of an assignment. You want to pick through each category, through each section. Okay, let's get into technology. And I smile because at my school this morning, my phone was blowing up, and that's never good at 7:10 in the morning for your phone to be blowing up. Internet was down. and we had a reboot of all our computers, and we're doing some testing right now, so it was great, great. So I say technology with a smile on my face. But technology is wonderful. Oh my goodness. One of the first things I started using, because being 20 years into this, I've seen a lot of changes. So one of the first things I started using with technology for accommodations was a shared Google Doc. Let me tell you, that is a change maker right there. So my suggestions for those writing goals, and my goodness, it is so hard sometimes to do writing with students. So sharing a Google Doc with them is amazing. You can see what they're typing, they can see what you're typing, you can have a little conversation back and forth, and it's just you two. You can go, if you need to, and look in the history and find out who typed what, and so you can see when they worked on it and how much they worked on the assignment. This is also a time where you can step in and give them suggestions. But let's say I'm scheduled to be in the classroom during like a second block time, or I'm scheduled to be in there during their reading and writing time, but I can't be in there because I have a meeting or I have some sort of PD to go to. If the student shares the doc, you don't have to be in the same room. You can be in your meeting and you can give them a little, hello, I see what you're doing there. Why don't you add in this vocabulary word? Or give them a sentence starter. It's just really wonderful. We have a new app, a new system of looking at students' computers and monitoring what they're doing called Borderless Classroom, and it has a chat feature on there. And so many of my teachers are using that right now. So it's the same kind of concept. If you have something like that, like a land school or something, you can chat with them and use it in a positive manner. So the next part is something I ran into just recently. I had some students. I know we did the assignment together. We had our intervention class. I helped them write this paper, but they have a 0 in it in the grade book. The student, I was like, okay, what happened? We did this assignment together. And the student's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, did you turn it in? I don't know how. So going back to simply, how does a student know how to turn in the assignment? So I was like, okay, I need you to download it as a PDF. What? It's like, okay, let's talk about this. And so once we figured out the system for turning in our assignments, I mean, these kids were rocking and rolling. But you have to make sure that they know, again, how to turn in assignments. Even if it's just like writing the assignment out, name, everything, but where do I turn it in to the teacher if it's on a piece of paper? How do I do this? So when we're thinking about accommodations, sometimes it's just the accommodation is teaching them how to do the assignment and that how to turn it in, how to get it to the teacher. Okay, so I've touched on this, those individualized sentence starters. So when you're sharing that doc with a student, or let's say you're not sharing a doc, let's say they're kind of, they're taking a test, the teacher wants it to be their own words, and so they're typing it up and then they're gonna take a picture of it and submit it. Something you can do is once you get the prompt from the teacher is do an individualized sentence starter. So a lot of times teachers will say, this is a prompt and this is how to start. But it gives you information for the first paragraph, but what do you do with the rest? And so when you're thinking about individualized sentence starters, is if you need to do your points, if the students need to address certain things within this writing prompt, doing a sentence starter for the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, however many paragraphs it needs to be. So it's not just at the top, because then usually what students do is just one complete run-on sentence for the whole essay, but breaking it up into parts for them. Suggestions in real time. So this is something that's hard to do, but it's so powerful. When I was in grad school and I would submit an assignment to a professor, when did I want it graded and turned into me? Immediately. I wanted her to look at it right then and give me that feedback so I could go in and learn or relearn whatever it is I needed to do. So as quickly as you can with assignments, giving them feedback. And this goes back to walking the room. So I'm walking the room and I'm looking at students' papers and I'm seeing that they're going down the right path, or maybe they're not going down the right path. But giving them that suggestion in real time so they can learn and then pivot from that thought if they're going off in the wrong way. So another really wonderful accommodation that you can just have students do immediately is speech to text. So turning on, it's just in Google, you can turn it on there. Some students, even we can have an accommodation to use their phone, to speak into their phone, to share their ideas and email it to themselves, whatever they feel comfortable with. But this is a bit of technology that is so powerful. I know several students who have these great ideas, but the processing from my great idea to writing it down on paper, I lose it somewhere in the process. So letting them have that accommodation to speak it, and it pops up, but then this is a great grammar lesson. So then they go in and they put the periods and they put the exclamation points and they add in all those things that they need to actually make it a paper, an assignment to turn in. So these are my on-the-fly takeaways for today. So building a classroom culture of imperfection, that it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay, we want to make mistakes because that's how we learn. Allowing those students to feel that in your room. And when you're an inclusion teacher, sometimes it can be difficult when you come into a classroom and that culture has been established. So being there and being in that supportive role, using those Post-it notes, doing those little mini conferences will help build this culture. Mistakes equal learning. So sometimes when you're a teacher, it might feel like you are performing for your students to get their attention, to make them laugh, to keep them engaged. So along with that thought process, think about if you were doing a problem on the board and you made a mistake, and maybe the students catch it, and so then you stop and you're like, okay, what did I do wrong here? Maybe you are doing the problem and you make a mistake and they didn't catch it, you stop and make a big deal out of it. Did no one catch what I just did? So with this, you have students that are like, oh, it's okay for me to make mistakes, my teacher makes mistakes. And I know it's silly, and it's probably something that was on a PBS special, in the 80s when I was watching those things. But it's so important because sometimes we look at our teachers and we're like, they never make a mistake. I can think of a math teacher right now. I don't think she's ever made a mistake at my school. But to create that culture of it's okay to make mistakes, we're all learning together, is very powerful for your building your classroom culture of imperfection. So when you're looking at your lesson, what is the purpose for your lesson? I know a big push right now in a lot of districts is your clear learning target. What is the purpose of my lesson? What does a student need to know by the end of this class period? So when you are doing those on-the-fly accommodations, you've got this, presentation you want the kids to create. What is the focus for that? What should the student really be learning from that and getting out of that? It's just not, check, we finished this. Check, we submitted it into the teacher now that we know how to turn in our assignments. But what is the focus for that lesson? And then what does the student need to learn from this task? What is it that's most important? You think about those holiday fun activities. Here, do this crossword puzzle. What is it that they really need to learn from that? And it might be that you want them to look for words and identify letters, and that's totally awesome. But you could use that in a different way too. thinking about, did the student turn in their work? Why or why not? Thinking about homework. Does the student have a place at home to do their homework? Can you give them an accommodation of letting that student do the work in your classroom early in the morning before school starts, maybe while they're eating their breakfast? And then honoring your why. So I shared with you guys that me presenting is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, right? But I want to share these things. I want to share what I've learned, and I want to share little things that work for me in my classroom. And so I think about honoring my why. So my why is I have a younger sister who has Down syndrome. And as wonderful and cute and precious as she is so stubborn. And I know that when she was in school, that her teachers were probably frustrated with her at times. And I think about that moment and how I would want my sister to be treated in her classroom, knowing that her teacher's like on her last, like, okay, Erin, we're done with this, or whatever it is, and having that patience. So when I'm thinking about providing these accommodations for kids, doing these mini conferences, working with these teachers, providing, creating this classroom of imperfection, I think about my little sister and what I would have wanted for her, and it helps me put things into perspective. Honoring my why. Why am I doing this? So, I know this is the SPED Collaborative, and I know that we are here because most of us are probably special education teachers or work in that capacity somehow. But these are accommodations we can allow for all students in the classroom. There was not one that I said that wouldn't be allowed for your classroom setting with any student. Now, I will say a disclaimer statement, not for testing. Testing and district protocols, that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about in the classroom, in your learning process. This is something, all these things are things that we can use for all students in our classrooms. Okay. I think I went a little under time. But do I have any questions, comments, concerns, anything I can answer for you guys or clarify?
You mentioned earlier about purposeful breaks, especially during those long high school block periods. Can you give some more examples of what that might look like?
For purposeful break? Yes. So sometimes it could be even earlier on when the kids come in and they're coming in hot off like a pep rally or something and they're just a little bit wild. Just taking a few minutes and turning on, especially if it's holiday time, turning on that Yule log on your TV and just turning on some music and say, hey guys, you've got 5 minutes to sit and talk with your friend. I always love to do levels. And I say this to kids a lot. You're at a level 10 right now, I need you about a 2. And so I'm like, okay guys, you're about at a 10. Let's bring it down to like level 5. And at the end, I want you at a level 2. And then let them go. And it might be a little loud, but you're gonna give them that chance to get that out of their system. I think another thing with purposeful breaks is when you're doing an assignment that's really challenging, I'm thinking about those, longer tests that they're taking, or if they're working on a presentation, they have like a rubric they will follow or something like that. Letting the students individually know that when you get to a certain point, you can take a break. So when you get to number 5, you can stand up, you can stretch. At that point, you can go to the bathroom, those things. One thing that we've touched on recently at my school was, is when can I ask to go to the bathroom? I know it's such a small thing, but man, it can interrupt your whole world when you're teaching. And so letting the kids know your rules for your classroom. So when I'm talking, when I'm instructing, when I'm in the front of the room, when I'm performing for you, no bathrooms. You can hold it till I get done, because I probably won't talk for more than 15 minutes. And then they just naturally know that after you finish your instruction, then they can, take their bathroom breaks or whatever they might need to do. Oh, you're welcome. Oh.
I just wanted to say that I really like how you brought up specifically the accommodations and just kind of piggybacking on that, we use those accommodations as we move on into adulthood as well. I'm dyslexic and I use voice to text for writing reports. So it's important, I think, for us to use them in the classroom and teach our students to understand that that's something that they'll be able to use, or teach them what the reason is that we're giving that accommodation. So.
You're right. You're right. So at this point in my years of doing this, I've taught pre-K through 12th grade. And so I have this unique perspective where when we're in pre-K and we're doing circle time in the morning, how important that is going to be for when they get to be seniors. And I know that sounds silly, but you've got to set up those routines and what they're learning and those strategies. And so you're right, like these accommodations are something you'll be able to use throughout. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
We have a question.
Oh, you have
back
a question?
Here. Yes, have a question back here. No. So these accommodations you have described today, do some of these work better for certain ages or certain subjects or certain abilities that students may have? Because I know you talked about verbal and you talked about action and paper, pencil, and technology. So are some of these better suited for some than others? So how do you make those decisions?
So you know your classroom the best, and you know your kids the best. And so, for example, when I was teaching pre-K, my little pre-Kers knew that during circle time, nothing else in the world existed, just our precious circle time. When you're thinking about high school, it can be different, but one thing you have to remember, that they may act like adults and they may have attitude like adults, but they are children too, and that they need to be taught the routines and procedures and how to work in the school setting. And so when you're thinking about accommodations, you have to think about whether it's appropriate for that grade level, for that age. But then again, remembering that you're creating a classroom culture, you're creating a school culture, and using those rules and those procedures is nothing new. My principal right now, he was an elementary school teacher and then became an elementary principal, and now he's in high school. And so him and I see eye to eye on things. We'll see things that are happening in the high school classroom, and I'm like, well, what's your procedure for getting markers from the back of your room? And the teacher's like, I tell the kids to get the markers. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. So you're meeting a stampede across your room to go get markers. Something as simple as saying, okay, you three people, you're gonna hand out my markers. So the concepts are the same, it's just how you present it. And I know that on here I put verbal, but you can also have prompts that you have written for kids too. So you can use that. I just didn't get into that. Oh, another question? Okay.
Do you ever lead kids or train kids to adopt these accommodations so that they initiate them and they learn to do them as when they know they need them?
Yes, I think that's a huge thing for kids to advocate for themselves. Absolutely. We think about the highlighting for a test. So let's say you're not there, and I had this happen. So you're not there in your inclusion classroom, and the regular education teacher just hands out the test. Some students that I had been working with raised their hand and are like, where's my highlights? I'm not supposed to do this whole test. So, creating that. In the high school setting, I was so proud. We had a student who's very, very shy, and somehow she didn't get in the right testing group, and she spoke up for herself and said, hey, I need to be in the group with extended time. I need about 10 more minutes to finish this test. And it was wonderful. So absolutely, teaching them to advocate for themselves, teaching them that you can ask for this accommodation is very, very powerful, and it makes them take control of their learning.
And I have one other question from the back. Do you recommend any of these, particularly for lower functioning or very nonverbal students, to, any of these accommodations you've talked about here that work particularly well with lower functioning students?
What do you mean by like lower functioning? Like?
Students that are less independent, that need more support, need more instruction, need more accommodations. Are any of these particularly good with those students?
So, even if a student is nonverbal, they can still advocate for themselves. If they're able to type, doing the Google Doc and having the student write in their questions there is very powerful. In high school setting, I was in a classroom where I got to observe this fantastic teacher, and he had red and green little paint samples, and if the student needed help, they didn't have to raise their hand, they didn't have to bring attention to themselves, they just put the red on top, and then they could ask whatever question. And as simple as it was for a 9th grade classroom, as simple as it was awesome. The teacher didn't have to go around the room asking, do you need help, do you need help? And even a student that's like struggling, even a student that's, maybe not accessing all of those standards within that lesson could use that to signal to that teacher, I need help there. Making sure that the accommodations match what the student needs is very, very important also. And so if you're working with a general education teacher with a student and they're just like, I just don't know what to do, that would not be an accommodation on the fly necessarily. That would be something where you would need to go in and ask the teacher, like, what exactly are you seeing that they're struggling in? That's very important. You can't just assume. What do you see? And then helping that teacher model what can happen or how you can best support. And then looking at the data. Are they able to achieve whatever goal that is in the end with that accommodation? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to piggyback on that just for a second and say I love that accommodation. I think that they can be so powerful no matter what grade band that you're working with. And I think that's often underutilized in classrooms. And people say, well, that's babyish, or we don't do cards and things like that here in our classroom. But I think it is powerful in a way that when you have, I add a yellow card into it. So red is I can't go on without you. Yellow is I can get started, but I can't go far. Or I'm patient enough to wait on you. And green is like I'm all good. We're rocking and rolling. And so knowing that you can look around any classroom, no matter what activity you have, no matter what level of learner that you have, and you can immediately see who needs your help right away. And as you're getting one group started and one group going, then you can manage your own time and the students' needs through that as well. So like if you've got kids who are using speech to text, but they can't get logged in because the internet is down, like what's happening this morning, then you have a chance to, address those things as you need to and get those learners moving so that you've not wasted all their time and they're probably getting extra time anyways, or you have modified curriculum in your room and so you need help to get those folks started. So it's a nice way to really, I think, differentiate any classroom regardless of what you're teaching and who your students are. It's a strategy that I like to use a lot. So I'm glad to hear that today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a visual teacher.
I think that's really important. And I wanted to say this, I was very specific when I said these are accommodations you can use. I didn't address anything that was a modification here today because that's another whole area for another day. These are just accommodations. This is something we can use with all students. With the red card, the green card, the yellow card. I love the yellow. That's a great idea. Claim it, girl, just claim it. Another thing that when you're looking at what are the students learning, how do we know that they know what they're doing, what are we going to do when they don't, how do we keep track of that? That's an added layer to that. And so I'm a big believer in clipboards. I actually have a clipboard with me here today. And there's something powerful about the teacher walking around the room and, monitoring whether the kids are understanding the assignment. And when you do have those red cards, green cards, going up to the student and and working through that with them, and then seeing that they have it, and then they can see you say check or highlight or whatever you're doing to keep track of that, and they're like, yes, I got it, I'm good. So that can be a very powerful thing too that you can do. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for that suggestion from the audience, and I'd like to open the audience to the floor to ask, does anyone else have ideas like that that are good accommodations on the fly? And I'd like Dr. Birch to respond, to comment. So any other ideas like that that you've used?
Trying to sit on this question, it's sharing, but it was something I had difficulty with as a middle school special ed inclusion teacher. During writing assignments, allowing students to use text-to-speech and getting the buy-in from the teachers. What's your experience with that, with being able to differentiate and getting the same product through a different process? And then also, I was fortunate to have a space, a converted teacher workroom, across from our general ed setting, so the students who wanted to take that option, and we gave that option to everybody in the class. It wasn't just an IEP accommodation. They were able to come out of the class because it could be a little noisy and distracting for others. So what's your experience with teacher buy-in, and then how do you manage that accommodation within the class setting?
So definitely talking to the teacher about it before you're actually in the moment, so you can answer any questions they have about that, and letting them know that, you know, that the student will be going back in to read what they've written through text to speech to text, and making those corrections as needed. As far as going to a separate room, I know, because I was a special education teacher, and then I did a little bit as just a general education teacher, and I didn't like my students leave my room because I wanted to see what they were doing. Not that I didn't trust my support there, but I wanted to see so I could keep track. And so sometimes I would let that student just sit out in the hallway right outside my door. In Florida, we had breezeways, and here in Tennessee, we have hallways. So I let them sit out in the breezeways when I was in Florida doing this. And it was also a great little break for the student if there was a lot going on in the room, to just, you know, to step outside, record what they needed to, and come back in. It shouldn't be something that takes up a whole class period too. It should be something where they put their story, whatever they want to say, into the document, and then they come on back into the classroom. So it's not like they're going to go out there and be gone 45 minutes or something. So I think having a time with that, explaining it to the teacher ahead of time, possibly showing them on the IEP, the student needs this and this is why, and then moving forward with that. And then readdressing that too. So sometimes as special education teachers, we will say, here's your IEP at a glance. Talk to you later. It's like, okay, now we're gonna do a follow-up. So we did this accommodation, the kids were able to use their speech to text, and they did a wonderful job. How can we improve it for next time? What are some things that we could do differently? And letting that general education teacher be part of that conversation. And those don't have to be like formal conversations either. It can be you're sitting at lunch with them, or you're walking out to their car with them. It doesn't have to be a big formal setting. To just have a quick conversation about, hey, did that work? Oh, it didn't work. Well, let's try this. Okay, high five. See you tomorrow. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question from online. So we're talking about accommodations on the fly. And so the question is, do you have any suggestions for helping improve executive functioning with accommodations on the fly?
Specifically, what kind of executive functioning?
Yes.
Like, can you elaborate on that?
My understanding would be, and I welcome the person who entered this question to add some comments there, but my understanding, for example, when you receive a lot of information and you're trying to sort or prioritize, I welcome any other comments from the audience on how to define executive functioning, but that's my understanding of executive functioning. Comments from the audience on that?
So my thought process, and I might be off, I need some more clarification on that, would be I'm in the front of the room as a teacher. Sorry, I just thought it's a really funny story. So I was doing so presenting to adults is very different than presenting to your students in your classroom, right? Very different. And one of my first PDs I did as an instructional coach was about teachers. One of the things I presented on was teachers giving too many directions at the beginning of the classroom, like beginning of assignment. And so I, in front of my teachers, was like, okay, so we're gonna read this article, you're gonna write 3 things that you think is important, then you're gonna share with your group, and then we're gonna come back together. And there was a teacher in the back that I know wasn't paying attention, and I was like, okay, I won't say his name, I'll just say Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, what did I just say? And Mr. Smith was like, Birch, I have no idea. And I'm like, okay, so let's stop and think about our kids in the classroom. So what could I have done better to help you know what's happening right now? And so maybe breaking it down. Okay, we're gonna read this article. Get the article out, go ahead. When you see the students are about getting done, you ask if you need 1 more minute, 30 seconds. Student raises their hand, give them that time. You get to the end, then say, hey, now I want you to write 3 things, most important things from that article. And then give them time to process that. You can also, I've seen my teachers, I've got some great teachers, that in a situation like that, and they're like, oh my gosh, I forgot. So they'll run up and they'll do a quick PowerPoint slide with the directions on it. Or you can plan that ahead of time, but sometimes it has to be on the fly. So you have those so that the kids can hear it, and then they can see it, and then refer back to it. Because you do have those students also that, I heard what you said, what was it again? And so then they can refer back to it on the board. And this also can be helpful with the ask 3 and then me, so they can ask their partner, what was this again? What are we supposed to be doing? Maybe that answered some of that question. I see some nods. Okay.
Any further comments on that from the floor?
You guys are really great.
Dr. Birch, thank you for this presentation today. And we do so much planning, but we do so much on the fly. We do it every day, and we have to be intuitive about it, right? And so the more we do it and the more ideas we hear, we can incorporate it, but to be intuitive to know what to use, when to use it, and with whom to use it. So this was very helpful, very practical, and so we hope that the audience will take it right back to the classroom. Thank you for presenting today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we've come to the end of the SPED Collaborative for today, and I invite you to go to our QR code. You'll see it up here. Those who are viewing online, the QR code's on the screen. I invite you to give feedback, to tell us what topics would you like in future sessions, who would you like to nominate to present in future sessions. We'd like to hear comments from today's sessions, and do keep in mind those who are in the room today, we do have a certificate to give you today for these hours of professional development, so you can pick them up in the hallway as you leave. Those who are viewing online, I regret to say we cannot provide that virtual certificate at this time. So if you're here in the room, we'll give you a certificate. Let me also remind you that we are recording this session today. We post the videos on our website, which is mtsu.edu/CEM, and you are invited to view them at another time, share them with other people, go back and revisit if you want to go back and hear again, to remember what was said today. And also, when you are looking ahead to our future events, you can go to our website to register for the future events. And when you register on our website, you will receive a link to then join the live event. We have some events coming up in the coming semester. In January, we will have what we call the Cross Collaborative. That's when we pull together a discussion of the main areas of our 3 collaboratives. We may pull together a discussion of how school counselors and SPED teachers work together, or we may have a discussion about how SPED and EL, working with multilingual learners who have special education needs, or we may have a panel where we pull all 3 together. But that is the Cross Collaborative. It is a virtual session, and you can register on our website at mtsu.edu/CEM. We also have 2 other on-site collaboratives coming, and please share these with your colleagues. In February, during School Counselors Week, we have the School Counselors Collaborative happening here in this room and online. And then in May, we have the ELL Collaborative happening here in the room and online. So during the school year, our events are hybrid, which means you can come sit with us in the room and get a certificate, or you can join us virtually. And today we have people from Memphis joining us. We have people from Sevier County joining us. And so we always will do it during the school year. Do want you to know, in the summer, we have summer academies for each SPED Collaborative, and that is an on-site only event. We invite you to come in, spend the day with us, and take a certificate home with your hours of PD. Let's see. Are there any questions or comments or even announcements from you before we wrap up? I do want to give a special thanks. Dr. Melinda Hirschman is with us today, and she is on staff at the Center for the Study and Treatment of Dyslexia here on campus. And they do really groundbreaking work, nationally recognized work. So Dr. Hirschman, thank you for being here today. Thanks for your contribution to helping us grow this SPED Collaborative. Please, and we'll give you a microphone to promote the Fox Conference. This is a unique opportunity.
I will take it. Yeah.
Sure.
We have our biannual Fox Reading Conference, which is endowed by the Fox family, so it's free to attend. We're doing a hybrid option this year as well. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong dates. March... 5th and 6th, I'm not sure. Look at the Center for Dyslexia website. I'm not sure why I'm blanking on the date, but it's 2 days this year, and the topics are language, dialectical differences, multilingual learners, developmental language delay. So feel free to sign up for the remote attendance or come join us in person for those 2 days. I think it's the 5th and 6th. It's a Thursday, Friday. We have some stellar presenters who are going to participate, and we'd be excited to see you there.
Thank you, Dr. Hirschman. Yes, an announcement here from Rutherford County.
Everyone from Rutherford County Schools, we have our Choice School Fair tonight, actually, at Rocky Fork Middle School. Rutherford County has 33 school choice options, so if you know families or even other districts that are interested in seeing how our, school choices, our choice schools are set up, please come out tonight, 4:30 at Rocky Fork Middle School. Families can learn the application process and talk to leaders of those schools.
And we have an announcement here from Tennessee School for the Deaf.
Since we're promoting conferences and whatnot, Tennessee Schools for the Deaf is going to be offering our statewide conference, which is going to be held at Tennessee School for the Blind campus in Nashville. And it will be January 19th and 20th for anyone who is interested. You can go ahead and take a look on our website. You'll find a link there, or anybody who wants to email me, it's m.meyer@tsdef.org, and I can go ahead and send you a link for that. But that should be a great opportunity as well.
Thank you. Any other announcements? So We have a YouTube channel, and those of you who are online right now are viewing on our YouTube channel. And I hope that many of you will revisit our site and go to our YouTube channel. When you are viewing our videos on our channel, I invite you to subscribe and to like the videos. We track viewing, and this helps us know who's watching. We track participation, we track districts. We want to know who's coming here. And you know, we've had participation now from over 4,000 participations by educators in Tennessee and 36 states across the country. Because we know that because we track it. And we like for y'all to let us know if you like what you're seeing. You can do it by feedback, or you can do it by hitting the like button and subscribing to the YouTube channel of the Center for Educational Media. If you go to YouTube, you'll just search for Center for Educational Media, and that takes you to our channel. With that, I want to thank Dr. Birch for being here. I want to thank the Tennessee Department of Education panel for being here. I want to thank Ms. Courtney Lee for being here from Clarksville Montgomery School System. And I want to thank all of you for being here today and being part of the SPED Collaborative December 2023. So with that, we will end our session today. Thank you for joining us online, and we invite you to go to our website and keep up with our upcoming events. Cross Collaborative in January, School Counselors Collaborative in February, and the ELL Collaborative in May. With this, I wish the best for those in Tennessee who have really gone through some real destruction recently from the tornadoes. May you be recovering and being supported during these times. I know the times are hard, and I wish you the best during this recovery time. And for the teachers in Tennessee, thanks for joining us, and come back the next time we're online with PK-12 Collaborative at the Center for Educational Media, College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University.